Hello, romance lovers. Today I have a story for you called The Ugly Wife of the Dark Duke. Don't forget to support this video with a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. Thank you for watching. The life of the main character, like a real fairy tale, begins in a wide and rich palace with golden windows and a luxurious exterior, near which various foliage grew calmly, and above it was a sky with clouds. The girl with red hair, who lived in such a beautiful castle, opened her eyes slightly, continuing to lie in bed. But she was not in a good mood, because she told herself that she only wanted to die. She sadly got up from the bed, rubbing her eyes from sleepiness and holding the blanket, thinking only about the fact that she was not at all interested in this world, because she still did not love herself, even if she was in the circles of the aristocracy. The girl went to the window and put her hand to it, looking at her own reflection in the glass, because she really doesn't like her red hair, freckles, and extra weight that makes her face look big. After that, she decided to stretch and do some light exercise, walking around the room and thinking about how she knew perfectly well who she was in this place, and now she was asking herself how bad she had been in her past life. The thing is, the lady with green eyes and fiery hair is a reincarnated lady from the real world, who has now received a new body and life in a fantasy novel, becoming a certain girl in a luxurious mansion. The heroine read the novel in her past life and now remembers that the main character in this world is a certain Arya, a girl who not only has enchanting white beauty, but also the abilities of a saint. Arya, realizing that she is a saint, goes according to the plot to the capital, where she soon meets various characters, especially looking at an unusual aristocrat with pink eyes. But she wasn't the only one with special features, because the main character of the novel, the prince, also had an unusual curse, because of which he hid in the shadows, trying to overcome his curse on his own, which is why he suffers. And his curse gradually began to weaken, because according to the plot of the novel, the prince met Arya, to whom he immediately took a liking, tenderly holding her hands as if she felt sympathy for her, and Arya herself admired him. Remembering all this, the red-haired girl sat in the dark bedroom and thought about how, up to this point, the novel seemed boring and monotonous. But when the prince and Arya get closer, another character appears. The thoughtful lady with green eyes looked at the ceiling and realized that the novel she had gotten into was quite unusual and atypical, because there was a plot twist that surprised her very much. And she means the appearance of the second main character with white hair, a sweet smile, and a wonderful charisma, whom she remembered, because that mysterious character is the Duke of the North named Benjamin. Having imagined in her head the prince in the shadows and the smiling Benjamin, the girl realized that in the plot the prince had a dark reputation and image. Unlike the Duke, who was kind and sweet, he also had beautiful green eyes and an alluring appearance. What was even more surprising for the girl was that Benjamin was married, which is why he often spent time with a certain lady, danced with her, because the heroine does not understand why it was necessary to create a charming but married guy in the novel. Because of all this, the girl continued to look at the ceiling and feel sad, not understanding why the author of the novel came up with the idea of creating a married Benjamin with a charismatic aura, who already has a political marriage. By this time, two maids approached the lady and began asking if the heroine wanted to eat, what her favorite dish was, and whether they should prepare her favorite tea for her, as if they wanted her to finally eat during her illness. The protagonist just smiled at the girls and said that she didn't need anything and that they shouldn't worry, although in fact they were right that she was sick and felt very unwell due to depression. All this seemed to be understood by the maids, who looked at the lady with concern, addressing their mistress as if they would rather hear from her a request to cook something, or at least do something. But the lady continued to stand near the window and looked at the room, not understanding where the real Grace could have gone, because she was reborn into her body, being adored by the maids and living in such a large mansion. The girl said that she just wanted to take a walk, and so the happy maids began to change the mistress's clothes, because before that she needed to take a bath. But the girl turned her head to the large mirror because something surprised her. Having looked closely at her body, which was clearly overweight, the girl realized that in her past life she couldn't even get out of bed, and therefore she thanks fate for at least being reborn into this body. The heroine continued to think about her unattractive body, which one black-haired maid noticed, and therefore asked the mistress if she should remove the mirror. But the red-haired girl said that this did not need to be done. She continued to look at her body with a smile and say that she was not that ugly, although in fact she considered herself exactly like that, an unattractive and unattractive plump girl. Remembering the past Grace, who lay in bed all day and did nothing, The girl realized that it was precisely because of this that she neglected her health and body, which is why she gained weight. After some time, the girl was already in the bath, where she continued to think about her body and past life, and was also embarrassed by the fact that she had to wash herself with someone else's help, because she did not like to show her body. The mistress's mood quickly worsened, but the maids did not notice this, because they looked at the heroine with a smile, offering her different dresses and saying that some would look good on her, while others would emphasize her beauty. The maids looked at the lady who was already dressed in a black dress, perfectly tailored to her body, which they admired, but there was no smile on the lady's face because she considered all outfits the same and boring. But when she realized that the maids were trying for her and sincerely believed that she was beautiful, the girl resolutely folded her hands and looked forward, realizing that now she must try to be different from the past Grace. Not paying attention to the various rumors around her, the girl decided to go to a luxurious garden, where there were a variety of flowers, bushes, and trees, creating a wonderful aroma and comfort, which was what the heroine needed. This is what the girls admired, raising their heads up and looking at the leaves on the trees and the beauty around them, saying out loud that the garden was even more beautiful up close than from the window. Behind the heroine was a maid with blonde hair, who turned to her with a smile, asking if the master had good taste, to which the girl with red hair turned around, asking the maid if she meant the master. The maid said that the gentleman had specially created the garden so that it could be seen from the main character's window. But she, the girl, reacted only with irritation and suspicion, realizing that she knew very well what the gentleman really was like. But as soon as she thought about the gentleman, it was as if only her thoughts made this same man appear next to her, which is why the girl heard someone else's steps next to her, because the guy was gradually approaching her in dark shoes. Turning around, the girl saw in front of her a smiling blonde man with green eyes, who called her a sweet girl, clearly happy about her appearance in the fairy tale garden. Benjamin asked the main character what brought her here, to which the red-haired girl responded with a question, saying that she should have come here, as if she saw some awkwardness in her presence. Mr. Benjamin just came up to her and sincerely said that he didn't mean that, but was just interested in her condition, because he was very worried. But the girl continued to smile, looking at the green-eyed gentleman. The girl did not believe the guy's words for the reason that she perfectly understands that in front of her is not just Duke Benjamin, but her husband, with whom in the novel she dealt, circling with him in the dance of life, because they were united by a political marriage and nothing more. The main character imagined herself as an extraordinary lady with fiery hair and green eyes, Grace Felton, who never even appeared in the novel, because her role is the most worthless of all. She only imagined herself with the Duke when they both do not even look at each other, because in reality, Grace was chosen as Benjamin's wife only to suppress his political power. The heroine wanted to go further and therefore moved away from the Duke, but when she turned around, she noticed that the guy was following her with a smile, when she did not stop thinking about her fate. That according to the plot, the past Grace stopped appearing in social circles after she married Benjamin was just a pawn in the hands of others. But when the girl thought that according to the plot, the Duke is a sweet and kind character who is now giving her his charming smile, she realized that this guy is clearly hiding something and is behaving suspiciously. Grace felt even sadder when she realized that the previous Grace had a bad relationship with her husband. But that wasn't what made her so sad. There was a problem that made her turn pale and worry even more. Imagining herself as if she were already dead, the red-haired lady remembered that according to the plot in the second half of the novel, she would die from an unknown disease, or maybe even at the hands of her husband. Because of her thoughts, the main character stopped seeing everything around her, because fear only created darkness, which is why she grabbed her shoulders and began to anxiously ask herself if this meant that her death was inevitable. She continued to breathe unevenly and worry, but the gentleman behind her noticed this, which is why he decided to reach out to her and put his hand on the girl's shoulder, worried about her condition. The girl was so scared and angry at Benjamin that she immediately pulled the guy's hand away from her with her own palm and turned sharply towards him as if the surprise had made her afraid. And Benjamin himself was so surprised by this that he quickly extended his hand towards himself, examining the lady's reaction with exactly the same surprise and shock. He anxiously asked the girl if everything was okay, to which the now calmed-down heroine replied that she was just scared and therefore everything was fine, although thoughts of death did not go away in her head. The girl was surprised by the guy's kindness because she feels that there is clearly some kind of secret in him, because according to the plot, he is not only a mysterious character, but also begins to slowly go crazy after the death of the heroine, smiling from madness. Due to the madness in the plot of the novel, the Duke kidnaps Arya and grabs her for himself, thus becoming the villain in the story, but soon meets the prince on his way. Also, because of the meeting with the prince, Benjamin dies right in Arya's arms, when blood slowly flows from his mouth and he is ready to say his last words before leaving the living world. Remembering that Benjamin most likely fell in love with Arya and died because of it, the girl walked around the garden anxiously and wondered if this was the reason he would try to kill her, because he no longer loved her. Remembering his smile and what the Duke himself often told Arya about Grace, the girl realized that she really liked the good-natured Benjamin, but she still couldn't trust him. Realizing this, the red-haired girl began to look around her thoughtfully as the wind slowly swayed her curls, and she worried about the fact that in any case, Benjamin did not love her, because they only had a political marriage. After a while, the main character decided to lie down on the red sofa, which caused her to yawn lazily, telling herself that it was very hard now, because she simply didn't understand why she felt something for Benjamin, if she understood everything. Turning her head to the side, the girl remembered that the Duke was constantly following her and did not lag behind, which is why she decided to end the walk. And she did not drive him away, so as not to hurt Benjamin's feelings. Turning over on her side, the angry lady looked away and seriously wondered if there was any real evidence that it was Benjamin who killed her, since the story itself didn't say anything about her. Then the girl tried to remember at least the memories of the past Grace, because of which she imagined the mansion in which she lives, emphasizing to herself that she is not so close to the gentleman, because they even live in different parts of the house. The thought alone that she herself ultimately didn't know the reason for her death, since it turned out that Benjamin didn't even have any particular reason to kill her personally, made her instantly get out of bed. But when she noticed a maid in front of her who asked if she was cold, the red-haired heroine only smiled, realizing that perhaps Benjamin was not as mean as she assumed. The white-haired maid continued to stand next to the lying Grace and fell silent when she heard the protagonist's stomach rumble, causing the green-eyed girl to quickly blush in embarrassment. The maid understood everything and asked if she wanted any food, and then Grace turned her head towards her, asking if the maid could bring her food in the room. Pointing her finger at the window and something in the distance, the red-haired lady told the maid that she wanted to see her food there, to which the maid replied with a smile, as if, of course, she would do everything. After that, the maid left and closed the door behind her. The main character turned her head in the opposite direction, because in the silence she noticed something that once again made her sad. The thing is that the girl looked at her plump hands with short fingers, realizing that she considered them not very attractive and even ugly, because other people might also consider her palms terrible. However, the girl realized that these hands were still better than those she had in her past life, because she remembered in her words a very terrible picture, or rather her own hand, thin and pale, which was pierced with an IV. And as soon as the girl began to think about her past life, in a lonely, quiet room where there was only her, she heard a voice, which made her turn around sharply, frightened, realizing that there was clearly a dark aura in the interior. She decided to get up from the red sofa and go closer to the window, realizing that she clearly heard something strange near her. Grace was sure of this for the reason that she caught with her hearing not just a voice, but a mocking laugh, which made her imagine in her head many smiles that seemed to laugh at her. The girl could not recover from the shock and therefore looked out the window with wide-open eyes. But at that moment, she heard the voice of the maid behind her, who kindly informed her about the tea that she had brought for her. The lady sat down at the table, and a maid with blonde hair placed a bowl of soup in front of her, telling her that she had decided to serve her something light so as not to overload her stomach. And Grace smiled at this. After the heroine thanked the maid and she left, the girl decided to taste the bread and was delighted to realize that it was incredibly tasty, which even surprised her, forgetting about all her troubles. The girl realized that the cook had clearly tried hard for her, preparing such an appetizing dish, but the red-haired aristocrat's attention was drawn to something else that she saw not far from her. Coming closer to the window, the main character took a closer look and noticed the Duke below, who was getting into a carriage in full dress, snow-white and well-groomed, leaving the main estate without warning. Having examined his face more closely, the lady saw not only the Duke's hair, his exquisite clothes, but also his worried face, which was clearly not calm, but spoke of something significant. But the heroine could not understand what Benjamin was thinking. She kept her eyes on the gentleman, watching from the window as the Duke got into the carriage, also asking the maid next to her where the aristocrat was going, but the girl only stuttered, not knowing what to answer. Noticing that the maid did not answer her immediately, but only stuttered and dragged out time, The mistress glanced at the servant and ordered her to speak immediately if she did not want to appear suspicious in her eyes. Then the servant decided to confess, decisively telling the heroine that the Duke was going to serve on the Rondel Canal. Hearing this, the girl with red hair was very surprised and thought about it, remembering that the main character, the saint who could meet the Duke, was right on the Rondel Canal. The maid also clarified that everyone would be there because there would be a service and a big ceremony. And the protagonist, looking at the view from the window, realized that the saint would definitely be there. That is, Arya. When the girl imagined her red, wavy hair, remembering that all the clothes on her looked like a pig, the girl realized that Benjamin probably did not love her and therefore paid attention to Arya. Because of her thoughts about clothes, the girl looked down and looked at herself, realizing that she didn't like herself too much, which is why she doubted every step she took, thinking that everything was not happening in her favor. Thoughts about her shortcomings settled so deeply in her head that she sadly lowered her head and began to think only about the fact that she looked very funny and ridiculous. Everyone around her was laughing at her, and she felt it. The change in the main character's mood was noticed by the blonde, who looked at the girl anxiously and asked her if she was okay, because she looked very anxious and unwell. The red-haired beauty continued to portray joy on her face, which is why she looked at the maid with a smile, saying that everything was fine and she had no need to worry, because she was too carried away by her thoughts. In her head, the protagonist kept recalling the beautiful appearance of the novel's main character, Saint Arya, whose beauty was praised even by the author of the story, and therefore it is not surprising for Grace that Benjamin is probably interested in her. Only by imagining Arya's snow-white hair, which even had a certain blue tint, did the red-haired lady realize that, combined with her golden eyes, the heroine could easily win the hearts of guys. But remembering herself, a girl with excess weight, wavy hair, and freckles that few people like, the lady knew that, unlike Arya, she herself was as if at the dark bottom, unable to change anything. She pictured Benjamin in her head, his face flushed, looking at something with a smile, knowing that he must have already fallen for Arya and her beauty if he was going to the ceremony. And unlike the Duke, who was constantly smiling and felt great, the main character was only in his shadow, unhappy and unloved even by herself, forced to just sit in the dark, as if waiting for a miracle. Then the protagonist slammed her hands on the table in anger and threateningly told the maid that she wanted to try the exercises, which at first surprised the maid, but then she still asked the mistress what she meant. Imagining herself in a white dress, the girl realized that even if she lost weight, she would hardly become more attractive. But since she had acquired a body that could at least move, she was obliged to try to make herself better. She stroked her hair and continued to think deeply about the fact that even when she recently walked in the garden, she was quite tired, which speaks of her weakness, because she cannot run normally and this needs to be corrected. Realizing that changes were possible, the girl resolutely stood up from her seat and looked at the light, promising herself from that moment on to lead a healthy lifestyle and train so well until she acquired the perfect body. She was not only thinking about her physical health because she imagined herself in her head with Benjamin, gloomy and mysterious, realizing that if she was so strong in spirit, then she should also part with her suspicious husband. Remembering the carriage in which the Duke went to pick up Arya, the heroine realized that if he decided to move towards her, it meant that their relationship had already moved from dead center, and it would be easier for her to start a new life without touching the plot of the story. The protagonist even imagined Benjamin and Arya as a couple looking at each other and smiling, wondering if they had made themselves a cute date on their parents' channel. Being completely alone in the room, the red-haired heroine realized that she could not even interfere with their relationship, because for her it was completely unimportant if she only wanted to run away and live away from everyone. Looking at her palms, the lady realized that divorce and escape would protect her from threats as much as possible, because she does not know for sure whether the Duke or someone else will kill her. And the girl also decided to do not only sports, but also try to break off her marriage with Benjamin. But the maid, who was still next to the main character, did not understand her intentions and strange behavior, which is why she looked at her with worry, wondering if everything was okay with her. Grace just turned to her with a very calm look and said that she was just serious, meaning her intentions to quickly change her life and no longer huddle in the Duke's mansion, to be his wife. After some time, she decided to look at herself in the mirror again, thinking that the basis of the diet is a balanced diet and sports, a healthy lifestyle. The girl thought that for sports she did not need dresses, but more suitable clothes, and so she turned to the maid, asking her if she could find something that would fit her body perfectly, which surprised the blonde. The blonde was surprised for the reason that from the very beginning she knew perfectly well that the previous Grace did not like her body and preferred to hide it. And now she was surprised that the gentlemen were asking her to find tight-fitting outfits. The maid stood nearby when the protagonist told her that if there was no such clothing, then they needed to tailor something they had. And she also asked the maid if they needed to call a tailor for this. The blonde asked if she could already call someone for such a job, to which the red-haired girl, looking at something, replied that it was good, but it would be better if the tailor was someone she already knew. The heroine quickly became surprised, looking ahead, because she did not even believe what he said, because he made such a strange request for the reason that he did not want to show his ugly body to new strangers. The maid understood everything and therefore left the room, closing the door behind her, leaving the main character alone. Alone with her sad thoughts about her ugly body and the desired transformation, as if from a caterpillar into a butterfly. Realizing that no one was watching her here anymore, the main character stood on the red curtain and pulled it with her hand, thinking about how when she was first reborn, it took her a long time to think everything through. Images of her past self popped into her head, preferring to lie on the bed in the dark and do nothing, gradually destroying her body and making it ugly and fat. She lay in bed for a very long time because she could not accept herself, and that is why her look was extremely lifeless, as if the suffering from her past life had been transferred to the new one, which is why she did not want to move. After this, the heroine decided to get up, thinking that this place was not at all the hospital ward where she had been in her past life, and therefore she should not waste time, because this was not a fictional world, but a new one, empty and fabulous. She still looked at the ceiling, lost and sad, and understood that after the rebirth it was difficult for her to find herself. But she only understood that she needed to find something so that many questions would become clear. And the girl meant the diary of the past Grace with a red cover and gold ornaments, which is probably somewhere here and in which a lot is written not only about Grace, but also about others. Grace couldn't figure out where that very diary of the past heroine was, but she still didn't want to leave the room just because of it, because she understands that the servants will sooner or later understand that she is not the real Grace and that something is wrong. At this rate, the girl, who lives in a luxurious palace that many can only dream of, has set herself the goal of escaping from here as soon as possible. And first of all, finding that very diary in which all the most important things are written down. That's why she started looking for the thing all over the room, but she couldn't find it, which was why she was already in despair. But suddenly her attention was drawn to the bed, which didn't seem to hold any secrets and was ordinary. But even the sleeping place did not give the girl any results, because of which she began to slowly become sad, imagining the past Grace behind her, because of whom she was going more and more crazy. However, as soon as the heroine approached the nightstand next to the bed and tried to open one of its drawers, the girl noticed a gold ring with a red stone on it, sparkling and bright. She took it with 2 fingers and began to examine it, thanks to which she realized that it was not precious at all, because it did not have an interesting design, and the red stone was completely artificial. But as soon as she took the ring in her hands, everything around became darker and foggier, which is why the girl put the jewelry back, not understanding what was happening to her, but emphasizing to herself that she had no memories beyond that moment. The bad thoughts were interrupted when the girl heard behind her the voice of a familiar white-haired maid who was always glad to see her. So the lady turned to the doors, looking at them and ordering the girl to enter. In her head, the girl immediately remembered that very kind blonde who was the happiest to see her, who always seemed to wag her tail like a dog, who was only happy to see the main character. The fair-haired girl with golden hair immediately entered Grace's chambers with a smile and asked her for forgiveness for disturbing the peace, and she also said that this time she brought something interesting. She held a tray with a pitcher and a couple of glasses in her hands, telling the protagonist that Noah had brought her a health supplement that would help her get back on her feet faster and feel better. But the red-haired main character only said doubtfully that she did not take any supplements, and then fell silent and just remembered that she herself had talked about them. And because of her forgetfulness, she had completely forgotten about them. And while the blonde looked at the heroine with obvious emotions of regret and sadness, as if she was about to cry, Grace thanked her for the gifts, telling her that she had simply been forgetting a lot lately. After Grace sat down at the table and began to look at the maid's tray, the blonde herself sadly said that the master was also worried about her, because he knew that she had started taking supplements. At that moment, the thought accidentally flashed through the protagonist's head that there might be something in the supplements, which is why she asked the blonde what the supplements contained, to which the maid replied sheepishly that they were for health. But even this did not calm the red-haired beauty, So she looked anxiously at the maid, not understanding whether she could trust Benjamin if he already knew perfectly well about her ailments, and therefore decided to present these suspicious additives. Because of the thoughts about the worst outcome, she even imagined herself as if she were dead, with blood flowing from her mouth, and all because of the additives, which in fact turned out to be poison with which Benjamin wanted to poison her. When the girl realized that they might try to kill her with the help of these additives, she only smiled sweetly, asking the maid to tell the master that she was very sorry that she made him worry. The blonde was already at the door and was telling the protagonist with a smile that she would do just that, already getting ready to leave on her own business, leaving the lady alone with the pills that were suspicious to her. The white doors slammed shut, and the red-haired girl silently looked at them, thinking in her head that she couldn't trust even such a smiling lady as a maid in this mansion, because sooner or later she would die for a reason unknown to her. Because of her worries, she decided not to drink the supplements from Benjamin that the maid brought her, but threw them in the trash without any doubt. Vel already assumes that it is poison. She looked at them with big eyes that clearly showed her worry, and she kept her eyes on the suspicious pills, thinking to herself that they looked even more suspicious when she looked at them closer. Wondering if the maids and Benjamin had tried to eliminate her from the start, the girl decided to look at the fireplace where coal and wood were slowly burning, crackling and filling the room with coziness. Sitting down next to him, the lady, saddened by the whole situation, began to think about the assassination attempts and whether there was any point in finding out when the assassination attempts on her began, if it was already clear that she needed to run away from here. The girl remembered that her diet was important to her now, and so she decided to leave her room and walk down the corridor with luxurious columns and ornaments, thinking that she needed to eat something healthy, but not overeat as usual. Once in the kitchen, after a while, the girl already saw in front of her a small portion of some salad with tomatoes, fried shrimp, radishes, and onions, which perfectly met her requirements. She slowly chewed the salad in her mouth, holding the fork in front of her and sadly thinking that there was very little salad, because it was delicious and she wanted to try another portion, even if she felt that she was already full. There was always a white-haired maid next to her, who looked at the protagonist with a smile and closely watched her every movement, while the lady herself continued to lie sadly and enjoy the taste of the dish. Smiling, the blonde laughed and clapped her hands, because she happily informed the heroine that in recent days she had a beautiful skin tone, which could not but please her. The main character was also happy about this, slightly covering her face with her hand in embarrassment, smiling at the maid and saying that this also made her happy, because it seemed to be the result of drinking a lot and eating healthy food. Hearing the words about drinking, the maid was surprised, asking Grace if drinking a lot of water really made her feel better, to which she replied with a smile that she had simply heard that it helped others, and so she decided to test it on herself. Calling the maid by the name of Sally, Grace asked her if the tailor she had called in the yard recently was due to arrive today, to which Sally replied that he should arrive any minute. Looking carefully at the table, on which lay a saucer of cookies and a cup of tea, Grace motioned for her to bring her another hot drink. But when she thought about telling him about the cookies, she hesitated, realizing that they were harmful. Grace thought hard, realizing that she didn't want the cookies because sweets ruined her figure. But she also didn't want to seem inhospitable to the tailor by not offering him a treat. She imagined herself all alone in an empty world, realizing that she was already fat, ugly, and lazy. And if she did not receive the tailor hospitably, everyone would gossip about how ill-mannered she was. As a result, the main character ordered the maid Sally to prepare everything for the tailor's arrival, and also warned her that she herself would not eat anything, to which the blonde said with a smile that she would do everything as she said. And after some time, a tailor arrived at the mansion, a dressed-up man with a beard, who smiled at the main character and greeted her, saying that he had just brought a catalog. He sat down opposite the red-haired lady on the sofa and had already put a paper with different texts and images on the table, telling her that he had already brought her several design options that she should look at and evaluate. The green-eyed lady began to look at the book with outfit options, constantly thinking about what was currently in fashion, and her eyes would have continued to run over the drawn outfits if she had not seen one of them that she liked. The girl pointed to the image she liked with her finger, telling the tailor that she liked this image the most and that she wanted to draw her attention to it. However, as soon as the tailor himself looked at the outfit in the catalog on the girl he liked, he only laughed, gently saying that it did not suit her, and therefore he could not offer her one like that. The red-haired lady was surprised by the tailor's words, but did not show it, because she calmly looked at him and said why he thought so, to which the man replied that Countess Corfin had already ordered this dress, and if she wore the same one, it would only cause ridicule in her direction. The tailor also said, gesturing with his hand, that the dress did not suit her because it had too many decorations, and also because of it, her freckles on her body would be visible, which he called a serious flaw. The first to respond to the master's insolence was the maid, who became angry to the point of rage, clenched her teeth, asking the tailor what he was allowing himself to do. But the protagonist next to her only calmly ordered her not to be angry. The red-haired heroine only looked menacingly at the tailor and realized that he wanted to start a quarrel with her, and therefore she would speak to him seriously if the guest himself had very few manners. Everything around her became darker as she heard the voice behind her again, mocking her, saying that she couldn't do anything. But the stern girl only thought that this was not true at all, and now she would prove it. Lowering her hand to the dress catalog, the girl ran her finger over it and calmly told the tailor that all the dress options he had were simply tasteless. And when the tailor asked the main character what she meant, the girl only repeated once again that she considered all the outfits boring and uninteresting, also looking at him with displeasure and anger at the same time. The tailor began to smile and laugh in disappointment, saying that most likely the lady was simply not familiar with the outfits he was offering and therefore considered them not so beautiful. To this, the dissatisfied protagonist also asked again what the tailor meant by his words, folding her arms across her chest. And the man merely asked a question in response to a question, asking the lady what she did not understand in his words. The red-haired lady's mood gradually worsened, causing her to look at the man with displeasure and tell him to tell her everything, that she was not a gnat if she thought that she herself knew little about dresses. The tailor only told the dissatisfied lady that she was constantly sitting in this mansion, an extension, and therefore did not see real fashion. And he also mentioned her physique, which he called unsuitable for dresses. The tailor's words only made the red-haired lady turn to Sally, who was standing next to her, to ask for her help, if she knew very well that she was often in the city, to which the blonde willingly agreed. Sally could only look at the lady in surprise as she, with her chin raised, told the tailor that she only wanted to order comfortable clothes from him and not listen to the shortcomings and peculiarities of the dresses. And the lady continued to talk to the tailor so arrogantly and slightly feignedly because this is part of her plan, because she knows perfectly well that the past Grace also used rumors for her own purposes. Imagining Sally whispering gossip into her friend's ear, Grace realized that all the servants got along well with each other and therefore told her everything that was going on around them, and she could use that. Grace understood perfectly well that this was her chance to spread good rumors about herself. And then she continued to talk to the tailor in a sweet and feigned manner, as if she understood that one dress did not suit her, and another simply would not fit her because of her figure. However, as soon as the tailor even said a word while the lady was finishing her sentence, Sally instantly flared up with rage, ordering the man to immediately shut up and not interrupt, because this was the house of Lady Grace and her husband. The protagonist never stopped thinking about Sally and her position in the original plot of the game, but now she is able to change everything, which is why she says provocative words to the tailor, and now looks disapprovingly at the maid. Grace only told Sally that she needed another tailor, to which the blonde smiled, saying that in that case she would fulfill all the wishes of the mistress and would do it herself with pleasure. The tailor was horrified by this, looked at the lady with fear, and said fearfully that she could not do this to him, because he had spent a very long time sewing many dresses especially for her figure. The main character did not pay any attention to the tailor's words, but simply stood up from the blue sofa and calmly said that she no longer cared and that she no longer needed anything from him. Getting up from the sofa, the girl with a gloomy look and red hair looked at the tailor and asked if he really sewed a large number of dresses for her figure in order to now come to her and openly tell her complexes. Having said this, the girl laughed, saying that with his attitude she would never order anything from him. But because of such words, the tailor clenched his fists, listening to ridicule. He didn't say anything, which is why the main character was already in the doorway because she was about to leave. And before that, she turned around indifferently, giving the tailor a smile and saying that she saw that he had nothing to say to her. The girl ordered the tailor to go and leave the palace, after which she herself hurried out of the room into the bright corridor, where there was no one who could tell her anything. Having closed the doors behind her, the heroine, agitated by the whole situation, had to go to them and began to breathe nervously, asking herself whether she had been too cruel to the tailor and whether everything had gone well for her reputation. As a result, the girl hurried to leave the bright corridor with golden decorative elements, telling herself that she was doing a great job and that she needed to continue to gain motivation and stick to her diet. All her mood and determination instantly disappeared somewhere, and the fact is that Benjamin himself invited her to dine together, because of which, after some time, she was already sitting opposite him, where on the table there were a variety of sweets and tea. The red-haired beauty was surprised by all the sweets on the table, thanking Benjamin for the invitation and saying that he had prepared an incredible amount of sweets for the Lenten meal. The man blushed at the compliments, smiling as he told the girl that he tried to buy the sweets that were currently popular so that she could try them. But most of all, the girl was interested in the drink in the white cup, which was emitting steam and to which the main character extended her hand, asking Benjamin what kind of treat it was. And Benjamin himself extended his hands to his cup, saying that it was brewed coffee, which was also popular now. But if she didn't like it, according to the gentleman, he would ask the servants to change the drink. The lady remained calm, saying that everything was fine and she would try it, although in fact she wanted to dance with joy, because she wanted to try coffee in her past life, when she was in the hospital. Benjamin even clapped his hands with a smile, telling the girl that it was very nice to hear this, and he was even more glad that she liked the treats, because he chose each cookie with deep thought. Grace laughed too, but deep down she didn't believe in the guy's sincerity until the end, because thanks to the plot she read, she knows that Benjamin will actually become the main villain in the story. After that, the man wanted to hand the girl a beautiful piece of strawberry cake on a plate, because he wanted the lady to try it. But the red-haired beauty only said that she would refrain from it. The guy with green eyes was very surprised by this, looking at the heroine with shock and asking her if she really didn't want to try it, as if he didn't expect such an answer from her at all. Grace just calmly started drinking coffee and explaining to the gentleman that she just wanted to lose weight and had already started leading a healthy lifestyle. And Benjamin was even more surprised by this, saying that he couldn't believe it. When Benjamin asked the lady if her decision had anything to do with the tailor, Grace, who continued to drink coffee, said that it was only for her health, enjoying the drink. Benjamin really wanted to talk to the beauty about the tailor, and so he even put his elbows on the table, telling the girl that he just wanted to ask her a couple of questions about that man, and the lady said that she was listening to him attentively. Grace looked at Benjamin with genuine shock when he told her that the tailor had been sent abroad and all his property confiscated because it was discovered that he had previously stolen from the royal family and evaded taxes. The handsome guy continued to smile and put his hands on her chest, promising the heroine that he would make sure that no one would tarnish her reputation anymore, because she herself said that all villains should be punished by law. Once again, he showed Grace his sincere smile, kindness, and joy, telling her that everything happened the way she wanted, and he would continue to do everything so that no one would insult or humiliate her. She was very confused by the guy's smile and his sincerity, which is why Grace quickly turned away from him and looked to the side, because there was already a new person standing there, to whom the lady turned her attention. Not far from her, she saw a cute and very shy guy, who is a new tailor invited to the mansion. But because of his shyness, he does not even look at the lady, nervously winking. The new tailor hastened to bow to the lady when tea with Benjamin was already over. And because of the strange person in front of her, the girl thought that all the tailors that the gentleman hired were very strange. The girl continued to look at the tailor who was talking to the maid and did not understand whether Benjamin was really so absorbed in Arya that he chose her tailor at random, although this was just the lady's guess. Grace herself did not know that only true aristocrats called in a personal tailor and did not think about it at all when the fortunate Sally came to her, asking if she remembered that banished tailor. The red-haired heroine replied that of course she remembered him, and she herself thought that, as she expected, things went wrong, because she had previously assumed that not everything goes smoothly. Sally just showed the girl his index finger, happily telling her that she herself did not believe that he was eventually found. But Sally happily added to her words that they didn't just find him, but found him dead on the border, under some tree. Because as it turned out, he was much worse than everyone thought. And the girl also suggested celebrating this. The protagonist was so surprised by this that she looked at Sally with wide eyes, asking her what she meant, while beads of sweat even began to run down her forehead from anxiety. Calm Sally just began to look thoughtfully at the ceiling, saying that they could just celebrate the death of someone who ultimately didn't even deserve to breathe in this world. Grace was so surprised by the maid's words that she continued to look at her with big eyes, not stopping asking what she wanted to say. But Sally's calmness was even very suspicious. Noticing the girl's strange behavior, her fear and wariness, Sally covered her mouth with her hand and apologized for her words, asking Grace if she found it unpleasant to hear. The maid's words only made the protagonist fold her arms and think about whether Sally considered her a typical cruel aristocrat or a delicate flower who shouldn't even talk about cruelty. She looked at her new dresses that were hanging nearby when everything in her eyes darkened and blurred. So the girl ordered the maid to prepare an outfit for her, because she wanted to take a walk, to get rid of the unpleasant feeling. And after some time, the girl was already in new clothes that were comfortable for her, because of which she spun and admired herself, although her body still seemed heavy and uncomfortable, but not as terrible as before. She sighed with a smile and closed her eyes, telling herself that she really liked these clothes and everything was starting out great. It seemed like nothing could upset her anymore. As soon as she went outside, she met Benjamin on her way, who obviously really liked her image, which is why he blushed, smiling and telling the girl that he was very glad that they met again. The lady was surprised that she saw the gentleman in front of her so often, but still she talked sweetly with Benjamin about the weather, about the warm sun, because of which they both went out for a walk. Grace kept thinking that her husband was acting very suspiciously, but she still looked at him while Benjamin asked her with a smile if he should plant peach trees in the garden and if she liked peaches in general. The red-haired lady thought about it, which caused her to look away, while her companion continued to smile and ask if she liked his idea, and what she liked most if she didn't like his option. And as soon as the heroine said that he was mistaken, Benjamin quickly turned to her with genuine surprise, because the lady explained that he was mistaken because she really liked peaches. Benjamin was very happy with the girl's words and was even happier when the girl admitted that she would like to try some peach cake, if she was lucky enough to make it. But in the next moment, the boy became sad when the protagonist said that she would still abstain from such desserts because she was on a diet, to which the blonde replied that this made him incredibly sad. The guy with green eyes sincerely asked the lady, looking into her eyes, if she had any favorite flowers that she would like to see in the garden. The main character thought, looking at her hands, confessing to the aristocrat that she actually doesn't know the names of many flowers, doesn't remember them, although in fact she doesn't understand gardening. The girl confessed this to the gentleman, which is why he apologized, saying that he didn't know at all that the girl wasn't interested in flowers, but there were still interesting flowers of different colors and varieties near the main character. But the heroes began to hear behind them how someone else was approaching them, how Benjamin and the protagonist turned away in different directions, which looked ridiculous, as if they had not talked to each other a couple of minutes ago. This was noticed by the smiling Sally, who came to the aristocrats for errands, but only put a smile on her face for the reason that she did not want to embarrass the couple with her presence. She smiled, but in her head she told herself not to think about anything else, because in reality the couple was just talking about flowers and nothing more, and it was best for her to get down to business. Regardless of whether Sally understood anything or not, after a while the main character was already in the mansion, where she was sitting on the sofa and surprisingly showing her cleavage with freckles. The happy lady said that it seemed to her that the blouse had become a little loose for her, and that meant that she had really lost weight, which surprised Sally, looking at the aristocrat and saying that it was true. The red-haired lady also looked at her hands, telling the maid that a simple dietary adjustment helped her not only lose weight, but also feel better, which she was incredibly happy about. The girls talked about how they absolutely had to go for a walk today, and because of the conversations about nature, the main character began to look at the window and the light, sadly asking herself why she hadn't met Benjamin in the garden lately. However, when she went out into the garden, she told herself with a smile that there was no need to worry about it, because she would soon leave the palace and divorce him when she lost another 8 kilograms. But the main character's thoughts were interrupted when she stopped, because she saw unusual cards next to the flowers, on which the names of the flowers were written, as if for a specific person. In her head, she immediately imagined a calm and reasonable Benjamin, who raised his hand to his lips and said that he had not taken into account that his wife might not know the names of the flowers in the garden. The red-haired lady asked Sally if the gardener had put these signs there, but the cheerful maid replied that it was so, because Benjamin himself had ordered him to do it. Because of the maid's words, the girl was touched by the master's actions, blushed, looking at the signs and not understanding why the man decided to take such care of her if she already believed that he did not need her. When everything around turned black, the lady, frightened by her experiences, heard behind her that same mocking voice, which asked her with a smile what she was thinking about now. The voice ordered her not to even think about the fact that anyone could treat her well, and after that it disappeared, leaving the girl alone in the garden as the sunset approached and the day came to an end. The girl's strange behavior was noticed by Sally, who looked at her and asked if she was cold or an aristocrat, because she began to shiver all over, and the heroine replied that this was so and she should have gone for a walk earlier. The main character was still standing near the flowers, which is why she looked only at him and wondered if she could really get used to being alone when she went out for a walk. The girl looked sadly at the mansion in which she lived, realizing that on this day she was not destined to see Benjamin, who was kind to her, After some time, Sally brought Grace a red cape, which she threw over the protagonist's shoulders, saying that she was worried about her condition because she had been looking thin lately. But the lady responded to this only with a smile. Still smiling, the girl said that there was no need to worry about this because it was happening because she had suddenly started losing weight. But Sally was still worried and therefore asked Grace with concern if someone had offended her, because she noticed that something strange had happened after she visited the office. As soon as the maid started talking about the new place, the red-haired heroine immediately looked at another mansion from the window, remembering the office that interested her, because in the original plot, the past Sally was hiding there. The girl remembered that in the novel, Grace hid there because she loved to read books in the office, and the real her in her past life also loved to read, especially when she was bedridden in the hospital. Grace immediately realized that it wouldn't hurt to visit that very office, which is why she looked at Sally with a smile, telling her to bring her some warm tea. The blonde in a black and white uniform happily said that she would fulfill the aristocrat's wishes, and then hurried to the kitchen to prepare the service and brew aromatic tea. The girl was left alone, which caused her green eyes to drop down, wondering if that very diary of the past Grace was in that office, because it was full of books and could easily be hidden, like a tree in the forest. Imagining herself as if surrounded by magic, the lady thought that it would be best for her not to have any memories of this world in Grace, because in that case, she could easily feign amnesia. Remembering that some memories of the real Grace remained in her head, the girl just remembered the happiest of them, namely, meeting Benjamin, when the people were marrying him and when her husband smiled at her. She approached the door and stopped, as if from fatigue, telling herself that these were the most unnecessary memories of all possible, because they would not help her escape from here and divorce Benjamin. But the next moment, she had already opened the doors with a sigh, telling herself that now she needed to turn her attention to the mysterious office, because there was definitely something interesting in it. However, as soon as she opened that very office and entered it, the red-haired lady was very surprised, looking at the interior, because what she saw was very different from what she remembers based on history and memories. Her hand slowly touched the windowsill, thanks to which the protagonist realized that even the windows here were washed to a shine, without the slightest speck of dust on them. The girl placed her hand on that very windowsill and began to look thoughtfully out the window, because she was a little saddened by the fact that from here there was only a view of the main building, which was quite boring. The heroine's thoughts stopped when she turned her head in the opposite direction, because she heard the arrival of the maid, who was already putting a cup of tea on the table, which Grace had previously asked for. Having looked closely at the drink itself, the girl realized that this time it was not ordinary expensive tea, but clearly something unusual, because it was decorated with a white flower, and the tea itself looked very rich and appetizing. When the protagonist asked Sally what kind of tea it was, the maid answered with a smile that it was flower tea, which is very popular now because desserts with added flowers are also in fashion, which the girl also suggested Grace try. Showing her palm to the maid, Grace told her with a smile that she didn't need anything else, and also ordered the maid to go, and she would stay here until lunch, after which she would go about other business. The maid left tea and cookies on the coffee table, said goodbye to Grace, and left the office. But the protagonist didn't even look at the treats, because she still couldn't figure out where her personal diary was. The girl walked past the table with gifts and looked around, telling herself that she urgently needed to find the diary, and fortunately, her body remembered 3 places where it could be in the office. She had in mind the desk in the office, the window, and the sofa, which she immediately began to examine in order to find what she wanted. But even when it came to the desk with drawers, her hope of finding the diary gradually faded. Little by little, the lady pulled out every drawer in the desk and did not find the diary in them, because she saw only letters and other papers there. But the treasured diary was not even in such an obvious place as the desk. However, as soon as the heroine accidentally hit the table with her hand, she heard a very strange, dull knock, which made her look at it in surprise and realize that there was a secret mechanism in the table. She didn't have to spend long solving puzzles and codes because she simply looked under the table and thereby discovered the diary, moving aside the secret drawer and noticing a dark burgundy book on it. The red-haired girl immediately took the diary in her hands, opened it, and began to count, realizing that the past, Grace began keeping it exactly from the moment she married Benjamin, which is very interesting. And even though the diary was mostly nonsense, Grace still read it because she imagined in her head the previous owner of the body who really wanted to have a child. Benjamin and Grace were still having trouble having children, which Grace remembers, and according to the plot, the girl turned to her husband, already looking him in the eye, in order to ask questions regarding this topic. But Benjamin told her something that made the past Grace very scared. She looked down anxiously and said that she would not ask him such questions anymore, also apologizing for her behavior. Now the main character is in the office and continues to study the diary, examining the interesting interior of the room because Benjamin specially decorated the office to Grace's taste, although he did not want children from her. Suddenly, tears began to flow from the main character's eyes, slowly falling to her chin and falling from her face, and the girl herself thought that she really didn't like all this. And even her hand weakened, causing the treasured diary that the lady so wanted to read to fall to the floor, as if it was now the most unnecessary thing. And for Grace, it no longer had meaning. The girl began to cry in the room alone, because the bitter feelings of the past Grace suddenly awoke in her, because of which the heroine realized that in fact Benjamin never loved her, and all this was just a deception. She began to cry, which caused tears to drip from her face onto the floor over and over again, because now not only her feelings were mixed in her soul, but also the stamp of the past. Grace, her loss and despair, which caused an unpleasant tangle of sadness and devastation to appear in the protagonist's soul. The feelings were so strong and unpleasant that the heroine soon lay in bed and continued to cry because of Benjamin's indifference to her. And next to her stood the maids, who were worried about her and were already planning something. In an attempt to cheer the girl up, Sally leaned over to Grace with a smile and told her that there was a village festival coming up soon, then asked if she wanted to go. The red-haired girl didn't even show her face when Sally told her that it wouldn't just be a festival, but a masquerade, where there would be something to see. And there would also be delicious food, masks and robes. Saddened, Grace slowly turned her head towards Sally, revealing not only her tired appearance, but also the dark circles under her eyes that were caused by her endless sadness. Sally continued talking to the lady about delicious food, which is why she suddenly began to cry herself when she began to confess to Grace that she was very worried about her, because in recent days she had not eaten or drunk anything. But in her head, the girl immediately imagined herself in a white nightgown, withdrawn and shy, when Sally and Benjamin stood in front of her, supposedly kind to her. But because of this kindness, she did not trust them. Grace was angry at the maid and Benjamin because she thought their kindness was not sincere. But suddenly the maid began to cry, causing tears to flow down her cheeks too. Seeing this, Grace came closer to her and asked what was wrong, and the crying Sally only said that she was very sad to see her like this, because she could not help in any way, did not know what to do. After that, the main character got out of bed and said that everything was completely wrong, because she was not guilty of anything, and she was just immersed in her thoughts, because of which she did not see everything around her. She even decided to smile, looking at Sally and asking her if she could cook her something, also laughing shyly as if with her request she wanted to quickly cheer up the maid. Sally cried less and less, but blushed, asking Grace if she should make soup and if she preferred a richer broth, to which the heroine asked if such soup didn't take too long to cook, since it required a lot of time and ingredients. Imagining the pots on the stove, the maid explained that the cook made such a good dish every day and kept it ready so that the lady could taste it whenever she wanted. Hearing such warm words from the maid and realizing that even the cook was trying to do something good for her, the busty lady with red hair asked Sally for forgiveness for hurting her feelings and making everyone worry. One maid just laughed, telling Grace that she didn't need to ask them for forgiveness so many times, because they both knew perfectly well what a kind heart and soul she had. And because of such words, Sally even smiled sincerely. Sally's hand reached out for something as Grace looked at her and said that she just wanted to take a hot bath when she had a delicious soup for lunch, and when she would feel so much better because of it. And after some time, the main character was already taking a bath, getting ready to put her foot in hot water because she had already managed to enjoy the soup, get out of bed, because the maid saved her from a depressive state. An hour after the bath, the girl was again lying on the bed with a diary in her hands, which she wanted to read again for the reason that this time she noticed something strange. The girl carefully read every page in the diary, in which the past Grace wrote that, as she had been advised earlier, she began to keep a personal diary to express her own feelings. Turning over onto her stomach with the diaries in her hands, the red-haired beauty seriously thought about the fact that the previous Grace was offered to keep a diary, as if someone had talked to her about it, and not she herself wanted to have such a hobby. But as soon as the heroine turned the page, she noticed strange marks with squares and check marks on one of them, which stopped exactly at the moment when Grace moved into a new body. The girl continued to look at the diary and not understand why she did not have any memories from Grace in the past, if she clearly did something and even marked it in the diary with check marks. The protagonist would have continued to study her personal diary if a small stone had not flown into her window and made a loud but short knock, which clearly could not be done by a dog, a cat, or a bird. The lady immediately noticed him, but was not afraid. She just turned her head towards the window and realized that she needed to come closer to understand what was going on. She decided to do just that, which is why she carefully looked out the window, not understanding who came up with the idea of throwing stones at the Duchess's window, especially at such a late hour when everyone was sleeping and resting. But in the window, the girl saw not an ordinary man, but her husband, who was waving his hand at her sweetly and smiling before saying something, because he had clearly come to her with some kind of request. However, the lady looked at him with apprehension, although she herself did not understand why she was doing this, because she had already met his gaze, and Benjamin was acting as if he definitely needed something from her. Overcoming her suspicions and some fear, the girl decided to open the window and with a calm expression ask Benjamin what he needed, realizing that nothing terrible would happen if she asked him this. But the young gentleman was so happy about this that his face even turned red as he watched the protagonist with delight and spoke enthusiastically, saying that he was very glad that she was not asleep yet. This did not surprise the young lady too much because he had remained calm, answering the boy that he could have conveyed his words to the butler or the maids so that they could have conveyed the message to her. But why he himself decided to visit, she did not understand. The guy with white hair and a red face from embarrassment said that he was not allowed to go into the annex, so he would not be able to convey anything to her through the servants. So he decided to appear under her window, which he was very happy about. He showed the main character a pebble in his hand, which he threw at her window, telling her that he chose it because of its size, because if she were asleep, she would not have heard it. And if not, then the others would not have woken up from the noise, but only she. After that, he awkwardly laughed at himself, saying that he was doing such strange things because he was worried about her, because he didn't see her in the garden, especially when he went out for a walk. But the protagonist only looked at the guy with interest, asking him what he meant when he said that he couldn't go to the annex where she lived all the time. To this, Benjamin responded with a smile, saying that at the moment her mansion was closed to outsiders and even to him, because he could not enter it without her permission, all this supposedly for security reasons. The Duke's words really struck the girl, because earlier she had mistakenly assumed that he did not come to her mansion because he did not want to see her. But as it turned out, the reason was completely different, which surprised the lady in the window. She was even more surprised when she suggested that she could have completely forgotten that the past Grace could have forbidden him from entering the palace, which is why she looked at the Duke in shock, asking if this was true. Benjamin only remained silent and admired the lady when she realized that the Duke was not rejecting her at all, but that she herself had put forward such demands, because of which they saw each other so rarely, and because of which he thought that the gentleman did not love her. The girl with red hair looks at him in surprise, realizing that it seems to be true, but now she has to find out for what reason the past Grace forbade him to appear in the extension. And when Grace asked the guy why he wanted to see her at such a late hour, he only smiled sincerely, saying that he couldn't restrain himself, because he really wanted to see his beloved wife, to make sure that everything was okay with her. But the charismatic and charming man spoke not only about his experiences, because he also extended his hand to the girl with a smile, inviting her to go to that very festival if she felt well and wanted to. In her head, the main character immediately imagined a carnival mask, realizing that it was not just a celebration, but an event where everyone had fun and spent time with joy, forgetting about the worst. The girl began to worry and breathe nervously because she does not remember Benjamin talking about the festival in the original story. Although the lady understands that thanks to the masks, she will be able to hide her ugly face and body under a fluffy dress. Benjamin very quickly noticed the change in his wife's mood, her poor health, which is why he turned his head to the side and wanted to call a doctor. But the girl in the window interrupted him, saying that she was fine. She blushed, about to pull the curtain with her hand to hide in the room. But before that, she shouted goodbye to Benjamin that she would still go with him to the festival. After this, the main character's window closed, but the Duke continued to look at it in surprise, as if he had not expected such a reaction from the lady, and especially her consent. The guy continued to stand under the protagonist's window with a shocked expression on his face, as if his whole body had turned to stone from the lady's words. But an unusual joy and anticipation still awoke in his soul. Next to him was his humble servant with dark hair, who looked curiously at the frozen master and called him, not understanding what had happened to Benjamin. The butler even confessed to the gentleman that he looked very happy, And as soon as he said this, Benjamin looked at him with his inspired eyes and smiled as if he had just been found out. Seriously scolding the butler, Benjamin said that since his wife had given him her time, he should give her the next 24 hours of his time and ordered everything to be prepared for this. The servant named Burton still looked around with indifference as the evening turned to night and the stars were visible in the sky. And he himself was thinking that Grace would hardly want to go to the festival with him at all. Meanwhile, the protagonist herself was already lying in her bed, but she couldn't fall asleep because she didn't believe that she had agreed to go to the festival with her husband, having big complexes regarding her body and a depressed mood. She imagined Benjamin with Arya, who smiled at her, clearly wanting to please the saint. Thinking about how Benjamin definitely didn't invite Grace to the festival in the original, but went there alone. The girl buried her face in the pillow out of worry, remembering that it was at that festival in the original story that Benjamin not only met Arya, but also had their first date, gave her a gift, saying that it was as a sign of their friendship. The girl couldn't open her eyes because she was tired, realizing that Benjamin didn't love her anyway, so he would definitely be interested in Arya at the upcoming festival, although the girl didn't know if this would change the course of history. Turning over onto her back, the red-haired girl suddenly remembered that bad rumors were gradually spreading among the nobles, which could eventually reach the royal family. She imagined Benjamin's hands and hers with wedding rings, knowing that from the outside it would look like everything was going well in the royally arranged marriage, since she and the Duke had arrived at the festival together. The protagonist happily sighed with relief when she realized that most likely Benjamin was so kind to her only in order to pretend to have a good marriage in front of everyone, and she had no need to worry now. Then she decided to turn over onto her other side, calmly realizing that her husband still remained in her eyes the one who would eventually kidnap Arya and fall in love with her, and forget about his wife, and maybe even kill her with his own hands. The next morning, the girl felt much better and more alive, which made her stretch with a smile, thinking that she really wanted to resume walking and eat a lot, continue to strive for weight loss and diet. She also said good morning to Sally, who was looking at her with a smile and holding something interesting and dark in her hands, which made Grace ask her if something had happened that was why she had been working since early morning. To this, the joyful, inspired maid replied that all of them, and not only she, were busy preparing for the upcoming festival, and she also wished the lady a good morning and was glad that she was in good health. The girls looked at each other with a smile, but Grace at this time was surprised at how quickly the news spread that she would be going to the festival with the Duke, which is why the servants had a lot of work from the very morning. The maid showed the protagonist a black robe, asking if she wanted to wear it to the festival, but the mistress looked at her with doubt, saying that she would most likely be hot in it because of its thickness. But Sally replied that these clothes were made from the skin of the magical beast Letten, which is why the robe absorbs heat during the day and lets air through in the evening, which is why it is not hot during the day and warm at night. Grace even blushed, telling Sally that it was very cool and admitting that she never thought that animals could have such magical abilities, surprising in their usefulness and existence. However, when the main character realized that she had heard the name Letten before, she wanted to examine the robe more closely, which is why she noticed an unusual brooch with green stones and gold on it. Sally, noticing that the gentleman was examining the clothes too long and closely, asked if she liked them, but the girl replied that everything suited her, and the robe suited her incredibly. Grace remembers this robe because it was the one Benjamin gave to Arya in the story, placing it on the saint's shoulders after Grace's death, when he managed to kidnap the main character of the story. At that moment, Arya looked at him with despair and fear, because Benjamin stole her, as if he was obsessed only with her, because of which he looked at the white-haired girl with a mantle on her shoulders and said that it suited her very well. And now Grace looks at this very robe, touches its brooch, and does not understand why it is in her hands if it is intended for Arya, and she should receive it soon. The dubious Duchess asked Sally if she could wear it, to which the maid said with slight indignation that of course it was, since this beast was killed especially for her, making it so beautiful. Grace noticed that Sally said that she had gotten the robe, not that it had been bought, causing the curious heroine to look at the maid and ask if they had bought the thing. Confused, Sally replied with a smile that it had supposedly happened by pure chance and that it had just happened that way because of trifles, but she was clearly hiding something from the lady through her politeness and reticence. The red-haired lady looked at the maid curiously and asked her if it was really so, when Sally answered her that it was so, but the heroine also could not understand why the girl was blocking the window. Then Grace asked Sally directly if the Duke had told her to tell her that they had gotten this fur by accident, supposedly from the shop, and Sally became silent, worried because the protagonist's quick-wittedness had caught her by surprise. Grace realized that her assumption seemed to be true if the maid was suspiciously silent. But also, when she stood up, she asked Sally to move away from the window when she began to be indignant, and to the last, to say why she needed this. Taking the robe in her hands, the red-haired lady hurried to look out the window, not paying attention to the maid, who began to noticeably worry and be surprised by the lady's behavior, because she had not managed to hide something. And what she saw from the window so amazed the red-haired beauty that she began to continuously look at something with round eyes and an open mouth. The fact is that under the window near the fence sat 3 exhausted knights who were asking each other whether the lady would definitely not notice them here. And they also talked about the campaign, which turned out to be very difficult for them. But while the guys were sure that the protagonist would not notice them, she herself watched them from the window without any obstacles, realizing that it was their maid who was trying to hide from the heroine's attention. Sally was still next to the lady, who this time turned to her with anger and new guesses, asking again whether they had really gotten the fur by accident, if under the window she saw warriors clearly after a hunt. Sally was confused, so she began to carefully tell Grace that she was very fragile and that they did not want to show her this. And besides, the festival would be very long, and there would be a lot of people there. She even smiled sweetly, telling the heroine that it was just a strange coincidence, because the beast had recently been successfully caught after several months of searching, although the girl still said that it was just an accident. Grace had even more questions about the strange Sally, causing her to look at her with surprise and her robe in her hands, asking what she meant by that. But when Sally anxiously admitted that they had managed to catch the beast that they rarely see even during hunting season, the red-haired beauty only grabbed her head and stopped the maid's story, saying that she understood everything. The sad lady realized that the robe was really made just for her, because of which she looked at it sadly, asking herself in her head if Arya had accidentally rejected it, if it was originally intended for her. And when she told the maid that she would put it on herself anyway, Sally instantly became delighted and clapped her hands, telling the girl that it was a great idea, and that she should try it on Grace's shoulders as soon as possible. The protagonist looked at Sally and said that she also wanted to give a gift to the knights who had gotten the robe for her, so she asked the thoughtful maid what would be the best gift to give them. Showing the girl her index finger, the intruding blonde replied that the knights would be glad to see the girl in this robe, for which they had sacrificed their strength and health. The dubious protagonist asked Sally if she was sure about this, to which the maid replied that it was indeed so, which soon led the girls to another room while the uncertain lady continued to hold the robe in her hands. Smiling at the lord, Allie pointed with her hand at the large number of different dresses and jewelry in the dressing room, as if saying that this was all just to dress up and decorate Grace for the festival. After a while, Grace was already trying on one dress when Sally told her that it seemed to be too big for her. But the red-haired lady replied that although that was true, they no longer had time to take it in. Sally smiled sweetly once again as she said goodbye and told the lady to take care of herself, wished her a pleasant rest and a fun time with everyone who would be at that masquerade. And the main character gracefully turned to her with a luxurious, dark robe on her shoulders, thanking her for the wishes and saying goodbye to the maid for a while. Having said goodbye to her beloved maid, the girl hurried out into the street, where there was indeed a clear sky and richly colored green foliage, which only decorated the beautiful, snow-white palace in which the lady lived. She had already put a light mask on her face, but even through it her great, genuine surprise was visible, because in front of her she saw the Duke, who had also dressed up for the sake of his beloved wife and the holiday. Benjamin was already standing near the carriage and greeted his companion with a smile, showing her his brown suit, red brooch, and dark mask, also inviting the lady to come with him and confessing to her that he had been very much looking forward to her arrival. The girl put her hand on the guy's palm, asking him if she was late, but the smiling gentleman replied that it was not so at all, because he had come early for her. The aristocrat in the beautiful mask smiled at the girls and told her that she was never late, not even taking his admiring green eyes off her. The gentleman's politeness makes the main character calm down and look at him with kind eyes, because all the main character's excitement has disappeared, and she is ready to spend time with Benjamin with pleasure. The red hair slightly rose into the air, and the lady herself thought that in the original, it was at this festival that Benjamin and Arya had an exciting date. And the fact that the robe that was supposed to be intended for the saint is in her possession only upsets Grace, because she does not know what will happen next. The couple continued to stand near the lush rose bushes and talk to each other until the arrival of the carriage intended for them. And while they were waiting for it, Benjamin suggested that the heroine call each other differently at the celebration. Surprised, Grace looked at the gentleman and asked him what he meant, also asking him to give examples of his ideas. In response, Benjamin blushed slightly as he asked the girl with a smile to call him darling, or just Benny, which sounds cute, memorable, and short. But this did not bother the protagonistskaya, because she continued to look at the guy with delight, thinking that this was an interesting undertaking in which she would definitely take part. She smiled sweetly at her husband as the warm rays of light fell on her small face, and also asked him to call her milady when she would call him by his new name without embarrassment. Benjamin smiled just as sincerely and kindly, because of which even through the mask his red cheeks were visible, as if for him this was not just a game, but something that made him even happier, when his soul was ready to tremble just from the smile of the main character. They continued walking around the garden, but Grace could not stop admiring the beauty and charisma of her husband, which is why she looked at him with admiration, realizing that in front of her now was not a simple eccentric, but a sweet, handsome man. Even their feet walked together in sync, like moldats. But this only allowed them to calmly talk about the fact that for Grace, this was the first festival in her life, because she liked to stay at home the most. The main character noticed a beautiful building in white and brown in front of her, about which Benjamin began to tell her, saying that the festival would be held in this temple, which the lady could not even see in her own lands. But when the guy immediately apologized for the fact that with his words he could humiliate the main character's hometown, where she grew up, the red-haired lady only laughed, thinking to herself that she had no intention of thinking about it. And also, smiling at his wife, Benjamin walked down the road and told the girl that the reason everyone wears masks on this day is because a demon might appear in the crowd and want to take someone's face. The couple walked calmly past the same villagers when Grace decided to tell her husband that she knew this legend because her father told it to her and her sister in their distant childhood. In response, Benjamin smiled, telling the heroine that he thought she had a very good relationship with her family, which surprised Grace, asking why he thought so. And the guy replied that she always said only good things about her family, which was touching. And when Benjamin made his wife think seriously, he himself turned his attention to the two children who ran past him, but the gentleman looked at them with great surprise. But when the main character was thinking about the fact that she only tells good things about her family because she only remembers these memories, Benjamin suddenly extended his hand to the girl, which made the lady amazed. As it turned out, the guy not only extended his hand to her, but also stood in front of her so that the girl would take his hand. But now she looks at him in surprise, asking the Duke what he wants. However, as soon as the main character called the gentleman by the name Benny, she herself was not afraid to put her hand on the Duke's hand, so that now they would stay even closer to each other. The next moment, the guy squeezed the girl's hand tightly and pulled her along with him, as if he was afraid that in a noisy city, where there would be a lot of unfamiliar people in masks, he could easily lose sight of his wife. He was already looking into the distance and was telling Grace that they should stay closer here so as not to get lost, saying this seriously because the experience of losing the girl makes him be careful around people. But he himself did not notice how his ear and cheeks turned red just from touching Grace's hand, because now every interaction with the girl makes him embarrassed, and his heart beats faster. The couple continued to smile and walk down the street sweetly while Benjamin asked his wife if she wanted to treat herself to some delicious food at the festival, because according to him, he still hears about the lady limiting herself in food. And as soon as the main character imagined in her head the possible delicacies that she would encounter at the celebration, she was surprised and delighted by them, saying to herself that she shouldn't eat so much. She looked at the many people who were already crowding around the stalls with delicious food, ready to give their money for it, which is why the embarrassed girl told Benjamin that she would allow herself only some delicacies. Hearing this, Benjamin instantly became happy and blushed for the umpteenth time, looking at the lady with a smile and telling her that on this occasion he would now quickly go to where he would bring the treats, and he asked the lady to wait. The girl waved goodbye to him sweetly, as did the gentleman, telling her that while he was gone, she could see the decorations and sights at the festival. But he also asked her to be careful with strangers. Grace said that she would do so, and soon she was left completely alone. She decided to stand near the shops, where people interested in buying something constantly passed by, when Benjamin was among them. She noticed how her husband was gradually merging with the crowd and moving further and further away. But the red-haired girl could not understand why Benjamin looked so worried if he was the most dangerous of them all. But the lady did not have to watch the Duke for long because something else caught her attention, causing her to turn her head with curious eyes, already intending to see something interesting. The thing is that very close to her, the main character noticed small children who were sitting on the carpet and were obviously selling something in order to get at least some change. They were poorly dressed, thin, and not very neat. Grace decided not to stand at a distance because she immediately approached the children and asked them with a smile what they were selling, leaning over to the goods of the street vendors and examining them, while one of the shy children was already looking at her. Stuttering, the boys and girls embarrassedly answered the heroine that they were selling soap. And next to them, the protagonist actually noticed pieces of soap, ordinary and even without decorations, which were lying on plates. With their sad, tired eyes, in which there was a drop of hope that someone would buy their product. But they also looked at Grace, asking her if she was going to buy the soap, as if they were really looking forward to it. The question from the children made the red-haired girl not only surprised, but also stuttered, because she did not know what to answer to those children who so wanted to sell what they had. That's why she stayed looking at the soap near the children, while other people walked around her, clearly not interested in the children's product, because they were going to buy something more interesting and useful at the festival. The girl carefully examined the soap next to the hands of one girl and realized that it had no special features in its appearance, because it looked ordinary, and the smell was the simplest, unremarkable. Because of this, the red-haired duchess doubted whether to buy her that soap just out of pity, but she was more interested in it, and the ladies themselves, whom she asked where their guardian was now. One girl answered the protagonist that their teacher was now in that direction, which caused the green-eyed girl in the robe to look the other way, surprised that their guardian was a teacher, which meant they were orphans. The heroine, suddenly indignant that the children were left unattended, saw in front of her a simpleton with red eyes and a bag in her hands, who was immediately surprised that her children had a buyer for soap. Grace smiled at the girl with the bag and asked her if she was the owner of the shelter, to which the stranger replied that this was not the case at all. The children immediately hid behind the dress of the girl with red eyes, looking at the protagonist in surprise when the teacher replied that she was a simple teacher. Grace looked in amazement as the teacher, holding a bag in her hands, spoke sweetly to the children as they smiled too. But she couldn't understand who would accept donations for the shelter when the stranger was just a teacher. The protagonist smiled sweetly in the same way, already thinking in her head that she shouldn't just say this, because her guesses were already leading her to the director of the orphanage, who should definitely be responsible for all the orphans. She had already imagined in her head a large quantity of soap, plain and tasteless in appearance, like the kind the children were selling, wondering if she could help them by buying up all their soap, although that was stupid. But then she imagined a document with a large text in her head, asking herself if she would be able to sponsor the shelter with a large sum of money. But the girl realized that this would not be possible either, because she was saving money for a divorce. The red-haired lady herself did not understand why she wanted to help the children, but she continued to talk to the teacher, asking her name. But as soon as the stranger heard this, she immediately looked anxiously at Grace. Then, noticing the girl's wariness, Grace first introduced herself, standing 2 steps further away from the lady and saying that it would be more correct to introduce herself, so that later she could ask the name of the interlocutor. The stranger then smiled sweetly, telling the heroine that her name was Cleta, although a drop of sweat still ran down her cheek, as if from excitement and uncertainty. And Grace herself smiled, looking at Cleta with cunning, because she was going to offer her her idea of help, because she was not going to ignore the strange urges of her heart to help people. As if these were particles of the past Grace, kind and merciful, the girl approached Cleta abruptly and unexpectedly, asking her if she would mind if she helped them sell the goods quickly and thus help them earn a lot of money. But the teacher was only afraid of Grace's behavior. She began to smile artificially and excitedly, because she did not understand why suddenly an unfamiliar noble lady with red hair approached her with such a strange request, as if she wanted to use her. Cleta assumed that in front of her stood the most ordinary swindler with an unusual mood to help, but soon Benjamin approached the heroine, whom the lady introduced to Cleta, which the teacher was very happy about. And after a while, Grace was already going to show Cleta everything she had bought to make good soap with the packaging that she kept in the basket, touching it with her hands, about to open it. Next to the heroine was Benjamin, who entertained the children with a smile, showing them various delicacies, which the girls and boys were very happy with, saying thank you to the gentleman for each treat. Cleta stirred the soap solution in a saucepan, asking Grace if it would be okay for her husband to be with the orphans, to which the red-haired beauty replied that it was all right, because he would entertain the children while they made soap. Opening the basket, the protagonist showed Cleta various tools and ingredients, including flowers and boxes, telling the commoner that they needed to focus on making the goods. Greta immediately began adding flowers to the soap solution, throwing them into the pot with the words that flowers are now in fashion, and therefore it will be beautiful, which surprised Cleta, looking at the heroine's work and asking her how long she has been doing needlework. The heroine was very engrossed in her work and therefore did not immediately answer Cleta's question, because she was adding beautiful yellow flowers to the molds with her hands, which smelled nice and gave the soap an exquisite look. Then the girl replied that she only did handicrafts as a hobby, but when Cleta noticed how quickly Grace got the job done, she said that she didn't believe it based on her skill. A short time later, ready-made bars of soap were already lying on the table in Cleta's house, not only decorated with yellow flowers, but also packed in beautiful wrapping, making them look attractive and very expensive. Cleta wanted to take one of these products in her hand, looking at it with surprise and saying that it would cost at least 450 coins, because it was real work and art. But in response, the red-haired girl only smiled, telling Cleet that in that case their products would cost not 400 but 900 coins per piece. Cleta was surprised by the protagonist's words, asking her if such a price was too high. But the lady answered calmly, saying that this was absolutely not the case. She even put her hand on her chest, blushed, but with a smile told Cleet that she was sure that everything would be sold out very quickly, because she was sure of it, and therefore there was no need to worry. After some time, when the main character and Cleta continued to do needlework, people on the street, or rather men in masks, began to be surprised by the pleasant aroma. But they looked around, because they did not know where it was coming from. The two girls in masks also stopped, looking at the amazing bubbles and asking each other if that pleasant aroma was really coming from them. And the bubbles were blown into the air by the main character, who herself was smiling, because the orphans next to her were also happy about such a trifle, who looked with inspiration and gloom at the transparent balls bursting in the air and rising upward. Next to them was Cleta, who was also busy with business, while beautiful packages of fragrant soap were already laid out next to her, ready for sale, and the soap bubbles only attracted even more attention from passers-by. Sometimes the girl would look at the laughing children with the main character and understand that the orphans were having a lot of fun with her. Because of this, she even smiled, and with interested eyes began to think about what kind of person such as Grace really was, who decided to help them, despite everything, especially her status. But the buyers were also interested in the soap, just as Cleet was in Grace. So they began asking her from afar what she was selling, to which the girl sweetly replied that she was selling scented soap. A man and a woman interested in such beauty as hand soap approached the shop and began to examine the goods, saying that it was incredibly beautiful, to which Cleta replied that they had worked hard for it. Looking closely at the soap itself, which was neatly laid out in packages with bows, Cleta immediately remembered what Grace had told her earlier when they talked about the sale of their products. Namely, the girl remembered how Grace told her to come up with a legend that if you buy soap at the festival, your wish will definitely come true, which she told the buyers, already imagining the cunning shadow of the heroine behind her. The couple was immediately touched by this story, which made them look at the soap even more delightfully, asking themselves whether they should take it, because it was so beautiful that they thought they would never find another like it. And so the festival went, thanks to which Cleta received so many customers who wanted to buy her magic soap that the line ended only after dark, when the trade at the festival was coming to an end. Among some people was the main character, who was carrying a basket in her hands with difficulty, because by the end of the working day her strength was just as exhausted as that of the others. Beads of sweat were running down her face because she had been helping with sales all this time, and Cleet, who was tired in the middle of the day due to the endless stream of customers wanting to buy soap for them. She also said goodbye to Cleta, who smiled at Grace and thanked her for all the help, thanks to which they received a large sum of money. And the red-haired beauty said that she would come to see them again. After this, the girl found herself back at the market, where there were still some people in masks, but among them the lady was no longer feeling so well, as if her health was about to get worse. And just as the girl was thinking that she was experiencing some strange feeling of anxiety along with nausea, a man she didn't know hit her right in the face, causing the heroine's mask to fly off her face with one blow. The stranger turned to the protagonist as if she herself did not understand what had happened, blushing and looking at Grace, while she in turn tried to hide her appearance and find a mask, because she was not allowed to show herself to others. But the very next moment the stranger smiled slyly, telling Grace that he himself thought that he had hit the statue because it was so heavy and thick for a woman that it seemed like a stone. not a person. The main character did not say a word, because not only is she afraid to even turn around to face the demon, who probably wants to steal her face, but she is also afraid to show herself, her fat face and the fact that she is Benjamin's wife. The man continued to talk about the main character's excess weight, which distorted the world around her, making it even more terrible, but she herself thought that the stranger himself was the first to hit her because he was pretty drunk. The red-haired beauty increasingly understood that she couldn't even say anything because of fear and strange feelings, which is why she just sat on the road and leaned back from excitement, nervously heaving, because she remembered the ridicule from her past life. The stranger did not hesitate to order the protagonist to eat less and watch herself so as not to be so ugly, because of which the ossel became increasingly out of breath and whispered to someone to help her, because the numbness did not allow her to do anything. And Grace's pleas were heard, because the stranger's words remained just words when a huge chest flew at him, preventing him from doing something terrible to the girl, much less continuing to offend her. Grace's savior turned out to be Benjamin, who looked at the stranger with indifference and told him that he was in a good mood today, but he didn't mind ruining it if he needed to protect his wife. After the stranger flew off with the suitcase to the other end of the street, Benjamin took off his hat and placed it on top of Grace's head to hide her appearance while she was still shaking with fear. With his lips slightly open, he asked the main character for forgiveness for the misunderstanding that had happened to her, and all because he had left her alone for a while. He also hugged her with a smile on his face, pressed her to himself, saying that this was the end of their adventures at the festival and they needed to return home before it got completely dark and other inadequate strangers pestered her. But the lady was not going to say anything, but only cried and pressed herself to Benjamin's chest, wanting to listen only to his calm voice, which pleased her, calmed her, and at the same time surprised her, because she considered him a villain all this time. The next morning, the main character was already at home, in the outbuilding, over which the dazzling sun rose, turning the beautiful sky light blue, which made the heroine's snow-white palace even more luxurious. Grace was also sitting on her bed in her bedroom, looking as if she had just woken up, but was very tired and lethargic, which is why she hung her head down and told herself that she didn't feel very well. She did not dare to raise her head because of sadness, because in her head she constantly recalled that very alley where she met the man, and because of whom she was attacked by those same terrible thoughts of loneliness and complexes. And when the girl realized that it was best for her to make some decision right then and there, she decided to call Sally, which caused the maid to peek out from behind the door and ask the Lord what she wanted that time. The red-haired lady asked for the ledger to be brought, causing Sally to just close her eyes and say that she would make the heroine's request in a minute. And while the maid was bringing her the book, the tired lady herself looked away and continued to sit on the bed, thinking that now it would be better to occupy herself with something than to think about bad things. After the girl opened the ledger and noticed a lot of check marks with columns, she wondered what it was, whether they really bought gold jewelry often. When the lady realized that according to the reports, 2 years had already passed since the wedding, she just remembered the moment when she was walking down the street with Benjamin and telling him that only 1 year had passed since their wedding. The main character was horrified, which even made her face turn blue, and she herself realized that she had been mistaken all this time and had spoken like that to Benjamin, who for some reason had turned a blind eye to it. And when the lady realized that now she definitely had to avoid making mistakes, she looked at the diary with concentration, telling herself to be more careful, especially regarding the topics of her personal life. But now she was thinking about the shelter and what she could do for it. Thinking of the orphans and the orphanage, the girl imagined tea leaves in her mind, realizing that if they still had funds according to the ledger, they could buy the orphans' land on which they would grow tea to sell. The girl with long, fiery hair continued to calmly think that in this case, she herself wanted to choose the land for growing tea and buy it, because this was a good plan. Grace turned her head slightly towards Sally and informed her that she wanted to buy that very plot of land, to which the maid said that she would soon prepare everything for this, also informing her that the gentleman had sent her a gift. Hearing the words about the surprise, Madame smiled sweetly, looking at the maid with tired eyes and asking her what kind of gift Benjamin had managed to send her. Memories of yesterday immediately popped into her head when the girl saw Benjamin not as cute and happy, but angry and serious, noticing that this was the first time the girl noticed his anger. And now Sally doesn't just tell the main character about the gift for Grace, but with a smile, she tells him that it's the most wonderful gift of all that could be in the world. But the protagonist herself did not smile, looking to the side already with seriousness, realizing that she should look at what Benjamin sent her. And so she was already walking down the corridor in a white nightgown right behind Sally, because the gift was in a completely different room, which is where they were both heading. Arriving at the place, the red-haired beauty noticed next to the dark table a large number of light flowers in white pots, which not only filled the room with a pleasant aroma, but also gave admiration and beauty to the observers around. Green-Eyed came up to them and began to touch the flower buds with a smile, telling Sally that they were very beautiful and would even be suitable for a herbarium, telling the maid that the surprise from Benjamin was excellent. But that was not all, for the maid showed in her hands a certain box which Grace had presented and asked her what to do with it. But the lady only looked at it and asked what it was. And although the box had a cute rabbit on it, the maid informed the girl that it seemed to be a box of cookies, and that she was not alone, because Benjamin had sent her several such gifts. Grace cast an interested glance at the boxes of cookies, telling the maid that she couldn't eat them herself because of her diet, so she asked Sally to take them to the nearest orphanage. However, the lady noticed a beautiful cylinder with tea leaves on the table in time, already reaching out her hand to it and asking Sally if it was a gift for her too, telling the maid that Benjamin had handed it to her just in time. Taking the tea in her hands, the green-eyed lady turned to the maid and asked her if she could find a small piece of expensive fabric for her, because he wanted to do something, to which Sally replied that she would do it. And when the girl with golden hair was about to leave, Grace called out her name at the last moment, which is why Sally turned back with a smile, asking the lady what she wanted. The obviously shy lady looked at Sally with a smile and said that she would like to ask her for one more favor, although it was clear from her behavior that she was very embarrassed to burden the already working lady with tasks for the umpteenth time. And sometime after the girl talked to the maid, she found herself in the city with a cape on her head so that no one would recognize her, and she came there with the goal of finding the house that interested her. She continued walking down the street and wondering if it was wrong for her to use her own funds, and she also remembered Benjamin's response to her going out for a walk around the city. The thing is, in her mind, she still remembered Benjamin looking at her with his elbows on the table, asking if she minded having security keep an eye on her from a distance for safety reasons. In front of him stood the protagonist of the story, already dressed in a dress suitable for going out, looking at the guy and thinking to herself whether this was not a well-thought-out move from Benjamin to always keep an eye on her through the servants and guards. The lady smiled, thanking Benjamin for his care and attention, but she herself thought that thanks to this, everything should go according to plan, because the streets where she was going to walk were quite calm. That's why the main character was already near the two-story building with several windows that interested her, and she herself was thinking about how it would now be easier for her to help Cleet, because there were fewer people than at the festival. She was already looking at the house and taking off her hood, thinking that she didn't just want to help Cleta, but to earn a special reputation, because it would be very important to her after the divorce, because that's how it was in the original story. And the red-haired main character had already entered Cleet's house. Something appeared to her, which the teacher looked at with surprise, while the lady herself sometimes thought about the fact that after the festival, Benjamin was supposed to meet with Arya. But this did not happen, which is strange. In her hand, Cleta examined the tea bag, telling Grace that she now understood what kind of business she had in mind when she said she wanted to help them with money. And she was also surprised by the amazingly simple and useful invention. Imagining a white man behind her opening the gate, Grace explained that since they were already allowed to transport goods abroad, they could sell tea varieties there, which would be profitable. The lady gestured with her hand and said that all this was because for ordinary people, tea was a very expensive product, and all because of a number of problems. And hearing this, Cleta looked at the girl with inspiration and asked what she meant. Recalling several tea brewing devices, Grace told Cleet that such a drink requires time and effort, which is why ordinary people do not have the opportunity to enjoy tea as much as aristocrats. The red-haired beauty, also telling that this was the reason she had invented the tea bag, lowered her invention into the cup, telling the surprised Cleta that now she would just need to pour boiling water into the cup and wait. Cleta looked at Grace and asked her if they could pull off such a brilliant idea when she couldn't even imagine how they could start a business. Grace placed her hands on the table and asked the lady what she was talking about, and Cleta explained that the situation at the shelter was unstable at the moment, and they didn't have enough ingredients or equipment to sell the packets. But the teacher's words only made the heroine smile and tell Cleta that all these problems had already been solved, and she shouldn't worry about such trifles. Cleta became even more embarrassed, which caused her to tilt her head forward and raise her hands to her chest, asking Grace with a smile what she meant. Showing her friend 2 fingers, the red-haired lady explained that Malona had already found a plantation with tea. They would sell it here. And as for the assistants, the girl hesitated, not knowing what to say. And then she imagined in her head an ode to the mothers of the child in the shelter, saying that they could hire some of the children's mothers, who would not only work, but also receive money. Hearing this, Cleta was slightly surprised, looking at Grace and asking her how she knew about the mothers if she had no contact with them, or even seen them before. But the girl was just as surprised by this, asking if she wanted to know where she got the information that the supposedly orphanage children actually have mothers. Remembering in her head those very children who sold soap at the festival, the heroine said that she understood this from the very beginning, because the children looked too well groomed for real orphans who have one guardian. And the red-haired beauty looked at Cleta and asked her if the children themselves knew that they had mothers, as if Grace already knew everything in advance in order to come to the house and not ask unnecessary questions. Cleta couldn't answer this question because of shyness or awkwardness, so Grace just smiled once again, telling her friend that in that case, the guys would really like to see their mothers. A kettle was boiling on the kitchen stove when Cleta confessed to the protagonist that she considered her very attentive and smart, and that Grace briefly responded with gratitude for the compliment. After this, the heroine began to brew tea in cups, dropping bags of herbs into them and telling Cleta that since she immediately accepted her business proposal, she guesses that the shelter has little money. And she also guesses that mothers can give money for the maintenance of their children. And soon the aromatic tea was already brewed and ready to drink. But Grace still told them that she understood perfectly well that in no shelter would mothers be able to continue to meet with their children. Cleta came closer to Gray and asked her what she meant by telling such strange things, and asking what made mothers act so strangely with their own children, both their own and those still small. Grace replied that she didn't fully know the answer to that question, but she wasn't going to poke her nose into other people's personal affairs, just that she wanted to ask about something else right now. Looking at Cleta, when the protagonist directly asked Cletu where the director of the orphanage, who takes responsibility for all expenses, had gone, the teacher answered uncertainly and fearfully that he had fled because he realized that the orphanage would not bring in any profit. But Grace just smiled sweetly, thanking Cletus for not being afraid to tell her this, as if this information would be very useful to her in the future. And now she told her friend that she would hire mothers for work, as planned. And while the girls were telling their plans for the business and were telling us that they would use such a large building to house workers, the three children themselves were playing outside with ants, or rather, looking at them. Hearing Grace's brilliant idea, Cleta was inspired and joined her palms, saying with a bang that it was wonderful, because not only would they take up the entire house with benefit, but mothers would also be able to see their children. Grace imagined tea in a jar for him above her head, telling him that she had already made arrangements with those people who would consistently deliver tea from the plantations directly here. The girl chose this particular plantation not just like that, but because she knows very well that according to the plot, soon a saint will come to her. A girl Arya with snow-white hair and appearance, who will plant a plantation in Yugoslavia, because of which the tea from that land will be of the highest quality for a long time. The next day, when the mothers had already moved into the house and the main character was reading a report on the bed, she was surprised, not understanding why. When there were 13 children in the house and 7 mothers who had arrived at the house, only one accepted the offer to work. Unsure and upset about this, she sadly lowered her eyes, because she understood that in this case all their efforts would be in vain if all the mothers in the house did not join in the work. She ran her hand over the paper with the text and realized that she needed to immediately create a good image, showing that this was a business of mothers and children, because if she didn't succeed, she wouldn't get an enviable reputation. The girl, who didn't quite know what to do, lay down on the bed and began to think about whether it would be better to find the director of the shelter and express her dissatisfaction to him. But in this case, Benjamin would definitely find out about him and teach him a lesson. Celia stood silently next to the main character, watching Grace's sadness and her lying on the bed, realizing that this time, too, she had to solve the problems that had gotten in her way. She jumped up from her bed when a brilliant idea came into her head to appease everyone with a gift, which is why the inspired heroine looked at Sally and told her about it with joy. But Sally never fully understood who exactly Grace had in mind, because the mistress's sudden proposal made the maid look at the lady in confusion and ask who she was talking about and what she had already decided. However, Grace was even more delighted, which is why she got up from the bed and smiled at the maid, saying that the best gift would be a letter decorated with flowers and made by hand. But Sally continued to ask the lady what she was talking about. Sparks appeared in the eyes of the main character when she remembered the beautiful flowers that Benjamin gave her, with which she could decorate the letter, because of which Grace turned red, already getting ready to fulfill her plan. The protagonist's radiance of joy could blind Sally, which is why she squinted her eyes and turned away from the lady, even though she wanted to ask who exactly she wanted to give the flowers and letter to. The maid was very eager to ask the Lord such a question for the reason that for the first time she saw Grace so animated and happy about something, when blush appeared on her face with a smile when the conversation turned to a beautiful letter with flowers. Once in the snow-white annex, the mistress immediately ordered the maid to prepare everything for her needlework, which made Sally even more wondering who exactly Grace was going to give such a thoughtful gift to, if not Benjamin. And while the protagonist was already busy with her business, her husband was also sitting at his desk and thinking about something, surrounded by antique furniture and paintings. Soon, a pleasant fan came. When above the building with the orphans and their mothers, there was not only a blue sky, but also bright stars. But the light was shining from the windows of the two-story house. One of the meme mothers, who had never decided to work in Grace and Cleda's business, was walking down the road and was still tired. There were bruises under her eyes. Her face was pale, but she was still carrying a bag with her. She didn't want to leave her old job, and so she carried her bag with her, thinking that soon it would be a year since she worked here. But she couldn't give it all up, because she wanted to buy her child at least some kind of gift. With the thought that she would really like to please her child, she came home, but saw an unusual box on the threshold, which she looked at, not understanding who left it and for whom it was. The box also came with a beautiful letter and envelope, which the woman picked up, examining it and not understanding what it was or who it was intended for. Holding the unusual things in her hands, the woman laughed, saying out loud that she hoped that these were not the antics of some rich noblewoman, because she did not want to join a group unknown to her, created quite recently. She thought that she would definitely throw the letter away and not even read it. But when she caught a pleasant aroma from it, she could not resist and opened it, which is why she began to seriously read the pleasantly smelling sheet. Already imagining how the unknown person wrote the letter, the woman read that all the children had a wonderful time, playing and running freely, and that her son Ash had been able to study the topic of mathematics very well. So the sender wanted Catherine to praise him for this. And although she did not see any memories of business in the letter, but only words about children, Catherine began to cry, saying with an ambiguous smile that these kind words were not enough for her. The woman still waited to stand on the threshold of her house and cry, thinking that Grace was a very strange person who not only decided to help them, but also sent such warm letters, as if with some purpose. And a month later, when the main character's idea with nice letters and flowers worked, she raised her hand in triumph and realized that her plan was completed, because all the mothers agreed to work and develop the business. She also held a letter in her hand, reading it and realizing that most likely Cleda was also happy with what was happening. But all these joys made the main character not only admire, but also miss the shelter. She still kept in her memories not only the joyful Cleta and her smile, but also the children, who also gave her a lot of positive emotions, being simple guys with bright souls. Therefore, after some time, the main character was already in the city and not alone, but accompanied by a lady with whom she talked, passing by people and tall buildings. Grace didn't just walk. She smiled sweetly because she understood that when everything was going well in her work and business, she herself began to rejoice, as if she understood that she was valuable and useful to others. However, when she turned her head to the side, because she noticed something unusual there, she realized that she saw in the distance not just two people, but familiar individuals whom she had never expected to see here. In the guy, the protagonist recognized her husband Benjamin, next to whom the saint, Aria, was smiling and standing, as if they had just started a pleasant conversation and were embarrassed by each other. Looking closely at the girl, the lady realized that it was indeed Aria, the main character in the story, who had managed to meet Benjamin, which meant that they could already fall in love with each other. But a few hours before this happened, the main character, as usual, made her bed in another house, which did not look like the mansion she was used to with its snow-white ornaments and high windows. As it turned out, the lady spent more and more time in the shelter, and all because of the nice mothers here, who treat her very well, which is why even when Grace remembered them, her cheeks turned pink. From behind the doorway appeared Cleta, who told Grace that everyone was waiting for her, especially the mothers who had gathered downstairs, which is why the joyful beauty turned her head with a smile and said that she was already on her way to them. The girls were already walking along the road and talking about how they needed to go to the textile workshop today and agree on cooperation. But when Cleta said that they had very little money for this, Grace just laughed, saying that it was not worth thinking about it because they would choose a more modest workshop. The red-haired lady explained that usually the big workshops leave the small shops with unrealized opportunities regarding deals with clothing stores, and this is what they will take advantage of. Already imagining a lot of tea bags in her head, the heroine explained that she was doing this because she knew that they would need more employees, and Cleta herself would not be enough for the work. But when Cleta heard from Grace that they would give the first batch of tea bags for free to some establishments in the city, the indignant Rahu teacher imagined this and asked if they would then start their business at a loss. Grace only explained with a smile that they do this so that their future customers can first get acquainted with the tea and then buy it, because first they will make a kind of advertisement for the product. And the lady with freckles on her face continued to smile, just remembering that one establishment in the capital would definitely accept their offer, because even plain water is now difficult to buy in the capital. The thing is that even after the Rundle Canal was cleaned, the water still has a strange taste, and the reason for this is the pollution in the western lands, which is why the lady imagined the water, clearly dark from dirt. And the lady looked at the cart, just remembered that Arya, according to the plot, will go to the western lands in order to clean the water from pollution, but Grace also wants to use this for her own purposes. The other mothers in the shelter, including Cleta, looked at the cart, knowing that the cart contained the first batch of tea, which surprised them, not realizing that there would be so much of the goods. Turning to the mothers, the red-haired girl pointed to the cart and said that this was not all, because when at least 5 establishments would cooperate with them, they would have even more work and troubles. Putting her hand on her chest and looking at her colleagues with a smile, the girl said that they were expecting to arrive, but now she would like to go to the workshop with someone, so she asked who would join her. The girl's request was answered by a woman with blonde hair, who said that she had some knowledge regarding textile workshops and therefore could go with her. And so after a while, they changed their name to Lily and went with Gray to the workshop, where the consultant showed them a variety of fabrics, thanks to which they could make tea bags. After the first workshop, the couple went to another, where a woman with blonde hair examined the fabric and told Grace about it, because they needed to find the most suitable one for the future business. Having visited several workshops, the girls were returning at the end of the day with a piece of fabric and suitcases when Grace smiled. But the woman, on the contrary, was dissatisfied with something. But she still looked at Gray with a smile, saying that she expected less resistance from the workshops, which were slow to cooperate with them because they were women and seemingly inexperienced. Grace smiled at her mother's words, saying that she really didn't expect such difficulties, but she was glad that the business was still developing, which would lead them to results. They both continued walking down the road and talking when the blonde madam asked Grace why she had chosen the smallest and most rundown workshop when the others were more pleasant to look at. The heroine thought, because in fact she did not want to say that the expensive workshops, noticing how expensive her robe was, did not offer anything that was different from a small workshop. The lady even touched the robe in her hands, remembering that despite all the professionalism of the elite workshops where they sew clothes, they still couldn't figure out what kind of cape it was. And now she remembered the reaction of the salesman in a modest textile workshop, who was surprised by the heroine's robe because he immediately recognized its value and rarity, which speaks of the master's excellent knowledge. But the lady asked her interlocutor to look at the fabric that she was carrying in her hands and remember that it was muslin, which is what they needed for business, to which the commoner replied that she knew it. Pointing her finger at herself, the red-haired lady simply explained that it was in that workshop that they made this fabric thin and high quality, which is what they needed, and that was why she had chosen it among the good ones. With such conversations, the girls walked past the low houses when the sun was shining above them, and the clear sky only raised their already good mood. The main character was happy that everything was going according to plan, and so she had a nice conversation with Lily, whom she liked, who was carrying fabric in her hands and was also not against meeting such an interesting person as Grace. But it was at that moment that she noticed her husband nearby with the saint, who was smiling at her, while Arya was laughing, as if they had already managed not only to become friends, but also to like each other. As soon as Grace saw them next to each other, her soul seemed to sink into her heels, and the whole world around her became several times darker, because with her jaw open, she understood that she had actually seen Arya Miller, especially next to Benjamin. She looked closely at her shining hair, her beautiful appearance, realizing that she had everything and even more, because she was not only the main character of the novel, but also the favorite of everyone in this world. And the appearance of this person forced the protagonist to only cover her head with a hood, because the last thing she wants now is to catch the eye of her and Benjamin, because she does not want to see both of them. But the heroine never managed to pass by her husband with Arya, because Benjamin looked at her and immediately recognized the mysterious hooded lady as his wife, who was passing by them. He wanted to call his beloved wife, but she didn't even look at him, proudly raising her chin and telling Lily to go on, not paying attention to others. Benjamin was shocked by Grace's behavior, and therefore looked at the women with big eyes while she continued to pass by as if they were ordinary passers-by for him. And although Benjamin was genuinely surprised, he still asked the protagonist if she would like to give him some heavy things that he would help them carry himself. To this, Grace calmly replied that everything was fine, since he already had a companion to talk to. But the Duke was even more surprised by his wife's words, telling her that everything was wrong and that it didn't matter at all. Grace walked on and didn't even look back, asking Benjamin if the only saint in the Empire was really unimportant to him. But the aristocrat, shocked by the lady's behavior, still asked what she meant. And when the guy supposedly asked the girl how she knew all this, Grace just turned to him with a sly smile, saying that even though she locked herself in the room for a long time, she still knew everything. The heroine also asked Benjamin not to take her for an idiot, and after that, she left, while she and the Duke were watched by the surprise saint, who had been left unattended, completely alone on the street. Just looking at Arya for a second, the main character saw a truly amazing girl because of her snow-white appearance, which seemed to show her embarrassment and modesty to her. After this, the protagonist found herself in a shelter, in a home that was already familiar and beloved to her, where important things were waiting for her again if Grace wanted to develop the business and strengthen it. While in the shelter, the main character watched as Lily was already standing next to the table and working on the fabric. Although she understood that she was probably interested in asking about Benjamin, but she remained silent, simply doing her work. After some time, Grace also joined the work, when there were curious children near the table. But the protagonist still thought about the fact that after meeting Benjamin in the city, something clearly changed in her behavior. The lady was cutting fabric with scissors and wanted to simply immerse herself in working on her business. But in her head, she still could not calm the thoughts about how hard it was for her to think about her husband and the saint. While working on the fabric at the table, Grace kept a blank face and told herself not to show any other emotions that sometimes seemed out of control as she recalled her recent meeting with the Duke and Arya. Sometimes she smiled, holding the light-colored fabric in her hands, but she still thought that she needed to get a divorce as soon as possible, and she was also afraid to find out about Benjamin's true feelings. And the girl was afraid to find out about Arya's feelings, because she no longer wanted to have anything to do with them, but only wanted everyone to forget about her, and for her to live only for herself. And when she thought about it, she herself did not notice how gradually the day was replaced by sunset, which is why she returned to her snow-white extension. From fatigue, the main character simply fell face down on the bed, thinking that she didn't even want to drink or eat, but just to lie down and at least not think about work. So the lady fell asleep. And the next day, she was already in a different, elegant green dress when she sat at the table and read a letter from Cleda, which said that out of the 10 institutions they had contacted, 3 had responded. And that was already good. She had previously told Cleet that she would not be able to take full part in the business in the future, which frightened the teacher. But the red-haired lady reassured her by promising to come for her share of the money soon. The lady decided to do this because her main goal now is divorce, just the thought of which made her sadly tilt her head to the side, because it is a difficult task. Sitting on a red chair, Madame asked Sally where the gentleman was at the moment, to which the maid replied that he should be resting in the main building right now. The calm heroine said that if he was not busy, she would like to talk to him for a minute, and Sally was happy about this, clapping her hands and saying that in that case she would quickly make them some tea. After Grez was left alone, the girl sadly lowered her head, not understanding whether she was in a hurry with the divorce and whether she should wait a little longer. Although she wanted it from the very beginning, and the determination inside her soul also pushes her to talk about it now. Therefore, after some time, the lady was already sitting opposite her husband in a snow-white gazebo and looking at him to start a conversation. While crickets were singing around them, tree branches and bushes were swaying along with them. Looking resolutely at Benjamin, the main character immediately told him that she had come here for a special purpose, because she needed to tell him something very important. The lady's words only made Benjamin blush, and he smiled sweetly at the madam and told her to tell him everything she wanted, not yet suspecting what exactly she would ask him for. Grace became even more serious when she noticed Benjamin's smile, which she found very unpleasant and insidious, because she is still sure that the Duke is not a good character, but a real villain who will still do as written in the original plot. After that, the girl lowered her eyes to a cup of aromatic tea, realizing that she wanted to die at the hands of the malicious and cunning Benjamin the least of all, which meant she needed to act now. Grace also remembered how the Duke looked at Arya, convincing himself that he would soon only like Arya anyway, and he would forget about her, which is why the protagonist did not want to connect her life with him any further. The sad heroine lowered her head more, regretfully realizing that a girl like her, ugly and ordinary at heart, was definitely not worthy of being Benjamin's wife. Therefore, looking at her husband with a slight smile, the red-haired beauty suggested that he get a divorce in a completely calm tone. Benjamin almost dropped the cup of tea from his hands when he looked at the girl in shock and asked her with a stunned expression what she just said, because he did not believe what was happening. But the calm protagonist only looked at her reflection in the tea, telling the Duke that they didn't love each other anyway, because they got married only for the sake of their families, and if they divorced, she would no longer appear in his life and interfere with anything. Grace's words did not make Benjamin even remotely happy or agree with her, because tears immediately rolled down his eyes. He gradually blushed and sadly asked the heroine why he decided so. And Grace, noticing that it seemed that Benjamin clearly felt something for her, if the words about divorce made him not only sad but also cry, was surprised, not understanding what to do next. She got up, asking the gentleman how he was feeling, but Benjamin became more and more sad, asking the girl with her head down what he had done wrong and what mistake he had made, while tears were rolling down his face. The guy desperately raised his head and tearfully told Grace that if she wanted something, he would definitely do it, just to return the lady's trust and love for him. With a crazy smile, Benjamin even asked Grace if she wanted him to kneel before her right now, while his eyes showed only despair and grief. Blushing, he even said that if the girl didn't like his face, he could wear a mask for the rest of his life just so that Grace would continue to love him, but not leave him. The main character looked at the crying man in amazement, not believing that the future villain of the plot really did not want a divorce and her departure, while Benjamin himself begged the girl not to leave him. The world around the heroine ceased to be bright and calm, because she was increasingly immersed in her dark thoughts about whether the person in front of her really loved Arya as much as she assumed, or whether this was all a delusion. She even imagined a smiling Arya with the gentleman, realizing that they could be a wonderful couple, because they had even met earlier. But now the lady sees Benjamin in front of her, who is crying, talking about divorce. Putting his Lapton on his knee, the sobbing gentleman said that he knew that he had many shortcomings, but he still did not want a divorce and wanted Grace to always be by his side. Benjamin continued to speak, saying that she knew that Grace was thoughtful and therefore probably thought a lot about divorce. But the lady herself looked at him in surprise, because she had imagined in her head a completely different reaction from the Duke. And when the guy sadly wiped the tears from his face, Proet Goinska still did not understand why he was crying so bitterly, because according to the plot, he should have been happy about such news, having previously fallen in love with Arya. Watching as drops of tears gradually descended from Benjamin's eyelashes to his chin, Grace told herself not to admire the guy's beauty, because her heart could tremble at any moment. When Benjamin stopped crying and gathered his strength, he looked at the girl and said that he would do as she said, but he wanted to tell her that he had one problem, which he would tell her now. Imagining a sad couple wanting a similar divorce, Benjamin explained to Grace that they would need permission from the royal family to get a divorce, as they were high nobles. Also, imagining a long document with a lot of text, the guy said that among aristocrats, divorce is a very difficult process, which can drag on not even for a month, but for a year. But when Benjamin said that in the near future they would need to spend more time together and even attend official events together, the girl was surprised and froze in place. She seemed to have turned into a white soul, exhausted by such difficulties, and so she asked Benjamin if she could go and rest, and he replied that he had to apologize to her for everything, and that he would soon start filing the documents. With tired eyes, Benjamin smiled at the heroine as he said goodbye and told her to get some rest as Grace left, leaving the saddened Duke alone with his sad thoughts about the divorce. Meanwhile, in the palace of Duke Benjamin, the main character was already talking about divorce, and in another castle, which had no less luxurious architecture, rich in columns and decorations, one aristocrat was spending his time. The crown prince, who is also the main character of the original plot, was spending his time in the palace, bored and now sat on a chair, bored and suffering from despondency. Sylvester, with his rich pink halos and dark hair, only occasionally glanced to the side and simply waited in his office for a miracle, because he really didn't like the boredom around him, and he wanted to hear something interesting. And his prayers seemed to have been heard, because a long-haired, worried liar rushed into his office, already holding a paper in his hands and asking the prince to let him in for important news. The prince just put his elbows on the table and said to the servant with displeasure that he should knock before entering, but he still ordered the servant to steal all the news, especially if it was urgent. The servant with the long tail was already preparing to open the papyrus scroll to the crown prince, and before doing so, he worriedly told Sylvester that a petition for divorce had been received. Hearing this, the prince only tilted his head to the side with a sly smile, looking away, telling the servant that this was already interesting, although he did not like the fact that the divorce process could drag on. But when the boy with the pink galmi heard that the divorce petition came from Duke Benjamin himself, Prince Sylvester looked at the servant in shock, wondering if this was really so. And while the prince was surprised by the sudden turn in his life, the sobbing maid Joanna was curiously examining the document, which said that the divorce process would last for 8 months, which upset her. Holding the document in her hands, the girl asked the servant next to her what she should do for the past 8 months. But the servant replied that he would like to offer her to dine with the Duke first, which is why the lady asked what it was for. The servant explained to the heroine that dinner with her husband is considered a joint pastime, which will be taken into account during the divorce process itself, since this is usually given special attention. In response, the main character only turned her head to the side, saying that the royal family even takes this into account, and does this mean that she should stay in this building for a long time? Being in a luxurious palace with golden windows and a beautiful, well-kept garden, the servant told the lady that she should not have any problems with this, because everything remains the same. The red-haired lady asked the guy if she could leave the castle for a while in that case, to which he replied that the Duke should provide her with at least one night to guard her, to which the lady replied that she didn't mind. Turning to the servant for the last time, the smiling mistress said that in that case she would go to the city, because in fact she wanted to visit her beloved orphanage and understand that everything was fine with the teacher, the children, and the mothers. After that, she walked down the corridor, thinking that she could use the opportunity to visit the shelter to leave the palace, because it was very uncomfortable and stuffy for her, which made it difficult for her to stay there for a long time. And as soon as she went out to walk a little around the palace, she wanted to turn back, because she felt a light, pleasant breeze on her body, swaying her robe and the train of her dress. The girl approached the source of the fleeting breeze and realized that one of the windows in the corridor was wide open, which is why the lady looked out of it. And thanks to this, she was able to see something unusual and a little frightening from it. The thing is that Grace was watching the garden from the window, which this time seemed very strange to her, because it had dark colors, even a kind of magical smoke, which she saw only there and nowhere else, which aroused her curiosity and suspicion. The lady hurried out into the garden and was already surrounded by strange, dark smoke, but she walked on, remembering that what she was interested in was somewhere here, because she remembered it for sure. She stopped and picked up a black stone that emitted dark magic, lying next to the same dark and inexplicable minerals, which the main character was not afraid to touch to study. The girl saw it before her eyes and began to examine the dark-colored stone even more curiously, realizing that a bad feeling was awakening in her soul because of such a strange object. But what surprised her even more was that in the reflection of the dark stone, the lady did not see herself or the garden, but noticed a luxurious carriage, from which a black-haired guy was getting out, to whom the other servants bowed. The girl could not see his face because the mysterious stranger did not show it to her, but the lady noticed his black hair, aristocratic clothes, and was already trying to guess who this gentleman was. However, when the main character clearly noticed the face of the unknown man, his pink eyes and recognizable appearance in the reflection of the dark stone, she immediately recognized him as Prince Sylvester, the main character of the storyline. It was not difficult for the girl to imagine the crown prince surrounded by a golden frame with flowers, realizing that he was just as important a character in the story as Arya herself, which surprised Grace. That's why she looked at the stone with her jaw slightly open, not understanding why the lady saw it in the mysterious mineral and for what reason it happened right now. And while the girl was trying to find answers to her own questions in her head, she was interrupted from her deep thoughts by the maid Sally, who looked at Grace and said that she had been looking for her for a very long time throughout the palace and garden. Curious Grace was slightly surprised by Sally's appearance, and therefore looked at her with surprise. But when she realized that it was the maid who could be the first to tell her about the stones, she called her by name. The protagonist continued to look at the dark stones scattered on the grass, which did not quite fit into the bright and godlike garden, asking the maid where these stones came from, which seemed wondrous to her in appearance. Gray even showed her one stone, which she held in her hands, but the maid was surprised by it just as the heroine herself was, saying that she knew that light stones were in fashion now, and not black ones like these, and therefore she herself could not explain their origin. Getting up from the grass, Gray began to hold the stone in his hands and tell Sally that it wasn't a question of whether this or that was fashionable, because she wanted to know more about the mysterious stone itself. Surprised by the mineral, the girl looked at the maid and said that she saw it from the window and immediately realized that it was very strange, which is why she came here, examining it already in her hands, which gave her more questions than answers. However, as soon as the main character said that the stone was too mysterious and unexplored for her, the small mineral suddenly exploded in the lady's hand, causing her entire palm to not only turn black, but also become filled with red liquid. After some time, the girl's injured hand was already being bandaged, which Sally did, the lady says, and she was very scared for her, not even imagining that the stone could explode, especially in her hands. After the maid bandaged her hand, she looked at it and told the heroine that they said that the crown prince had arrived at the palace today and would also stay for dinner and then leave. Grace placed her hand on her robe, telling Sally that since she had injured her right hand, it would be difficult for her to observe table etiquette at dinner. And she also wondered if the prince's arrival was connected with these same stones. But she still smiled at Sally, telling her that she had nothing else to do, so she would go and walk outside again, enjoy the fresh air, and then come back. The girl also said that she would be able to have dinner with the prince another time, so she was not upset, which made Sally smile, who was holding a first aid kit and telling the lady to be careful on the walk. After that, the red-haired beauty walked around places that were interesting to her, with tall columns and snow-white ornaments, which she glanced at, realizing that she had not been there for a long time. However, when she caught strange words with her ears, which were clearly spoken by an unknown guy nearby, Grace fell silent and began to look around, trying to find the source of the noise. Arriving at the noise, the main character noticed Benjamin and the prince, who were talking as if they were arguing about something, which is why the red-haired lady did not understand why they were talking in raised tones. Sylvester and Benjamin quickly noticed the presence of another person nearby, causing the prince to look at Grace with displeasure, asking the Duke who it was and what the girl was doing there, while Benjamin looked at his wife in amazement. And noticing that Benjamin called a lady unknown to him his wife, the prince was very surprised, indignantly looking at how his brother spoke to the surprised Grace, not understanding why his brother had not introduced them earlier. Benjamin hastened to ask Greta first what brought her here, but as soon as he noticed his wife's hand wrapped in bandages, he immediately asked her to tell him what happened, to which the girl replied that it was just a trifle, because the mirror was broken. The unpleasant news seriously saddened Benjamin, which is why he took his wife's hand and stroked it, saying that he already guessed how seriously she was injured, which is why it hurts him. The main character was very surprised by the guy's actions, because of which her cheeks even turned red, and she herself watched Benjamin with surprise, saying that now there was nothing serious because her palm was successfully processed. But the prince, deprived of attention, did not want to stand aside, because of which he appeared between Benjamin and Grace, asking them if he was bothering them, because of which the Duke and Duchess blushed. Benjamin only forced the prince to bow to his wife, grabbed his brother by the head and told him that even though he was the crown prince, it didn't mean he could be so rude to his wife. Smiling sweetly at the heroine, Benjamin informed her that he would now take Sylvester to his room, and then he would definitely return to her, asking her to wait a little before doing so. In response, the protagonist also smiled, saying that of course she agreed to her husband's request, although in reality she did not want to meet not only him, but especially not the crown prince, wanting only to take a walk. And after some time, when the Duke had already taken his brother to another room, he returned to his wife, apologizing for the inconvenience and asking how she was feeling, to which the lady in the robe replied that she felt fine. Benjamin bowed to his wife again and asked her to ask Sylvester for his bosom, because they had grown up together as children and had spoken without any formalities, which could have affected their behavior. The main heroine smiled sweetly, saying that she now understood the crown prince and therefore forgave his emotionality. Smiling at his wife again, Benjamin asked Grace if he could take her somewhere, to which the girl agreed, leaving the couple walking down the hallway alone. And after some time, the head of the Agrinia was able to get to her beloved shelter, which she wanted to visit so much, because of which she opened the door of the house with joy and a grin, telling all the inhabitants that she had come to visit them. The first to see the lady was Cleta, who looked at her with wide eyes of surprise, exclaiming that she was incredibly glad to see her, because without her she felt empty every day. The red-haired lady entering the house said that because of the positive letters, she did not think at all that it was lonely and boring here without her. And Lily handed Grace an envelope, which the girl was already preparing to take with her hand. The lady, amazed at how beautiful Lily's handwriting was, read from the document that they had signed even more contracts for cooperation, thanks to which they would soon be successful. Cleda also joined the work, saying with a thoughtful look that she should visit the tea plantations, since she hadn't visited them because of the train that took forever to get there, and also because of the fee to pass through the gates. Hearing the word about the gate, the main character looked at Kletu and warned her that it was not necessary to use the gate, because she heard that the source of their energy was unstable and it was dangerous. But as soon as the heroine remembered those very gates that she had told Clete about, a terrible picture immediately appeared in her head of how Arya and the Crown Prince clearly end up in some kind of catastrophe, where smoke rises and they are both terrified. In addition, the protagonist imagined an unusual, seemingly magical explosion of red color, which injures ordinary villagers, forcing them to run away from the gate, with which something terrible is happening. Also imagining the shadow of a person, personifying psychological pain, the lady remembered that a catastrophe was about to happen due to the gates failing and injuring people. Understanding that it was because of that disaster that Arya would appear behind the gate, after which she would bless their tea plantations, the girl realized that even though they would lose significant income in business, she had to stop the tragedy, because human lives were more important than money, which is why she looked kindly at Kletu, telling her to continue using carriages instead of the gate to transport goods. Thus, the main character solved several problems, and after that, she left the shelter, smiling goodbye to the girls, who also waved to the lady and wished her a safe ride home. In fact, the girl couldn't stop thinking about the disaster with the gate, and that's why she thoughtfully lowered her head, realizing that he had figured out how to prevent the death of people using his status and position. She remembered Benjamin, thinking that according to her plans, he should not be accused of anything, because he is a very kind person who has done many charitable deeds, including the fact that he himself suggested the idea of transporting goods through the gate. The girl remembered that according to the plot, many newspapers opposed to the government would spread rumors against Benjamin, and Arya would become his consolation and a ray of light in the darkness, which is why the lady imagined her husband with a saint. The red-haired beauty walked on and adjusted her hood, wondering if the Duke would stop loving Arya if she prevented the disaster from the start. But then the lady told herself that it was not the time to think about that. The girl continued walking straight towards the beautiful castle with a dark roof and gilded ornaments, preparing to carry out her plan, in which the Gate Control Bureau would need to check them today. She was already walking through the market, surprised by the people. Thinking about the plan, which is that due to the intolerance of magic here, she will faint, which will cause Benjamin to immediately check the magic gate and find the problem. Looking at the high castle, the lady understood that this was the fastest and shortest solution that she had to implement, because she had very little time left to save people. And everything happened exactly as the heroine said, because she herself did not notice how she fainted, which caused memories of little Grace to surface in her mind, who often cried because everyone laughed at her. Being all alone among the bullies, the girl wanted to withdraw into herself and cry, because other children made fun of her freckles and other parts of her body, which is why Grace called her brother or sister for help. The main character's brother was not far from her, but he was not going to help his sister or protect her from ridicule even when she called him, and when the ladies not only laughed at her appearance, but also made her afraid of worms and insects. He just turned his head away as if nothing bad had happened, ignoring Grace's pleas for help. The children continued to make fun of little Grace, pulling her hair and showing her nasty black eyes, but she still loved him and hoped that he would protect her. However, the main character's brother, Gilbert, never helped his sister with bullying, but simply turned away from her and left, while the girl saw in him the last ray of hope in the darkness of violence and ridicule. At this point, the girl woke up, feeling an incredible heat in her body and realizing that she was no longer in the center of the market, but lying in a bed, most likely in a palace. She immediately wanted to get up from the bed, touch her head and blush more and more, repeating to herself that this was a dream of the past Grace, who was bullied as a child, but not hers. And she also looked at the bedroom interior, realizing that she was in her own home with its familiar atmosphere, thinking that her plan to solve the problem with the disaster was an act that was very dangerous. The girl remembered that as soon as she began to lose consciousness, a night girl came up to her and held the heroine so that she did not fall, as well as Grace, and said that she suddenly felt ill. Even in the girl's eyes, there was already a darkening and gloom when she explained with difficulty to the girl with red eyes and hair that she felt terrible precisely because of the gait, with which something was definitely wrong. And right now, the girl was sitting on the bed and remembered all of this. Surprised, not understanding whether she had lost consciousness after all of this, because at this rate, she could attract much more attention than was required. From the constant thoughts about the fact that perhaps she had done everything much worse than was required, the girl wanted to fall on the bed, thinking that now she might be banned from going outside at all. Even the protagonist's hand was turning red from the heat as she continued to lie on the bed and tell herself that she was a real idiot who only wanted to quickly solve a problem that was actually much more serious and dangerous. Reyes, who told herself that she was in fact a useless lady among real important characters, lay on the bed and became increasingly red from heat and sadness. But suddenly the girl stopped thinking about the bad, because she suddenly heard a dull knock, as if a small stone had hit her window again and would bounce off the glass. She immediately got out of bed and looked at the window, not believing that someone had actually come to see her. Expecting to see someone under the window, she opened it and looked out, looking at the landscape in surprise, while her whole body gradually turned red from the heat and feeling unwell. Feeling not very well, Grace looked out of the window with difficulty, which was noticed by Benjamin, who was below and telling the lady to risk her health and not stand at the window if she was not yet well. The blushing lady continued to stand near the window and ask Benjamin for forgiveness because she had caused him too much trouble, allegedly not imagining that she would faint. But Benjamin said that it was no big deal, also telling with a smile that he himself regularly buys the tea bags that she creates and sends them along with supplies, which is why, thanks to her, the Northerners can now enjoy tea. And Benjamin even blushed, telling the lady that although it was very easy and simple in everyone's opinion, she was the first who decided to make tea not just an aristocratic drink, but an accessible pleasure for everyone, which is why he admires her. Her husband's compliments made the lady smile and look at Benjamin with more lively emotions, although in her head she still thought that she did not feel happy, or so it seemed to her. And the guy also calmly said that because of her fainting, he really started checking the gates for reliability. And he also asked the lady to talk now about the saint, since it is important. Hearing this, the red-haired head of the Aryan was surprised and became animated already because of her worries about this, asking Benjamin if he was sure of his intentions, as if Grace's worries and fears were surfacing again. To this, the calm and even a little sad Duke replied that he was going to talk to her now, although he knew that it must be unpleasant for her if he behaved too persistently. But the protagonist only put her hands on the windowsill and said that in that case she would not appear, because she is interested in hearing his words, and talking through the window is a very strange activity. As soon as Benjamin heard that the main character was inviting him to a room, he immediately blushed and looked at the girl with a sincere, enthusiastic smile, saying that he would definitely drop in to see her. However, when Gray sank to the floor, making no more show of herself to Benjamin, she blushed deeply from embarrassment, not understanding that she had just said that. But if she herself does, she will distance herself from the Duke, divorce him. She realized that now she needed to quickly prepare for the meeting with Benjamin, which is why she stood up and looked at herself in the mirror, noticing the redness on her face and unkempt hair, which surprised her. Grace touched her cheek, looking not only at her tired face, but also at her body and hair, trying to find an answer in her head to the question of why she was so worried about her own appearance when her husband was about to come to her.